When they had all clambered onto the raven's broad back, Locetus suddenly beat its wings. A huge black shadow rose from the burning altar below. The powerful lift forced the 7 people on the bird's back to crouch instinctively, fingers digging into the gaps between its iron-hard feathers. The rescue went unexpectedly smoothly. The high winds whistled past their cheeks and quickly carried away the scorching heat rising from the sea of fire beneath them. They leaned over the raven's edge and looked down. The entire camp had been reduced to a raging inferno. Flames licked the night sky, and the werewolves' dying howls, the explosions of clashing magic, and the anguished cries of the wounded merged into a single dirge. Beneath Sargeras's feet, the ground trembled and rose, forming a stone platform that lifted him into the air. His black robe snapped in the wind as he looked down on the contorted faces in the blaze before fixing his gaze on the desecrated altar. Expressionless, he slowly raised his wand and pointed it at the blood-tinted sky. The night seemed to tear open. A bright moon was swallowed by surging red clouds, and then Sargeras's wand swept down. Countless burning stars ripped through the clouds, trailing fiery tails and hurtling toward the earth like spears hurled by an enraged god. They screamed through the air and struck within the ring of fire below. Booms rolled one after another, as if the heart of the world were being struck again and again. Stone pillars shattered under the shockwaves. The filthy altar collapsed. The werewolves were incinerated by the crimson flames, their last screams lost beneath the thunder of destruction. Sargeras watched it all with the detached interest of someone watching fireworks. The people on the Raven stared in stunned silence. They felt the heat on their faces, the tremor of devastating magic sweeping past, and the long, fiery tails of the meteors as the sky emptied. "This is starfall," someone breathed. "An ancient war magic, lost to time." Tonks swallowed and muttered in a dry voice. No wonder only 2 people dared to come. If it hadn't been for the rescue, he could probably have handled it on his own. Down on the scorched earth, with each explosion and every fading werewolf aura, Sargeras felt the mark of the Blood Moon Alliance on his arm grow clearer. He did not attempt to suppress or remove it. After only a few tens of seconds, the meteor shower abruptly ceased. The crimson clouds drifted apart and the clear moonlight returned, revealing the devastation. The ancient stone circle had been obliterated, replaced by a vast crater of scorched and glassed soil. Everything, altar and beasts alike, had been utterly annihilated. Sargeras lowered his wand and looked down at the mark on his arm, a crimson sigil that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. He had uprooted the Alliance's core power, but he knew such an organization would always have scattered remnants, agents on foreign missions who failed to return, or followers hiding in remote corners, waiting. This mark, deepened by the carnage, would act like a beacon of vengeance. If those remnants ever crossed his path, it would whisper their hatred awake and draw them back to him like moths to a flame. The raven folded its wings and set down on the rim of the blasted earth, stirring dust and heat. The survivors slid off with trembling limbs. The rescued wizards stared at the huge crater, dazed and hollow-eyed. Tonks drew a few deep breaths of smoke and ember-laden air, trying to steady herself. She turned to Sargeras, her voice a complicated mix of respect that had outgrown their student days and a thread of something like fear. "Professor Greengrass, what do we do next? These survivors need to be cared for, and as for tonight, how will the Ministry of Magic?" She left the question unsaid. The scale of the magical disturbance and the scorched ruin below made it impossible to hide. Sargeras swept his gaze over the trembling figures and rested it on Tonks. "The survivors will be taken to St. Mungo's for treatment," he said. "I have already informed Dean Mirabella Rolston. As for tonight's events," he paused, then spoke calmly, "report everything you witnessed truthfully." Tonks understood immediately. He did not seem to care whether the ministry learned what had happened or what they would do about it. After seeing that war magic, punishment on a divine scale, she realized a chilling truth. Before a wizard capable of such power, the ministry's laws and authority could be as fragile as paper. Even if the ministers hid in Gringotts' deepest vaults, they would be powerless against a blow like that. Accountability felt pale and ridiculous in the face of such force. No wonder he had been able to teach at Hogwarts after what he'd done at the Quidditch World Cup. At that moment, the 5 rescued wizards, leaning on one another, came forward and expressed their gratitude with shaking voices. Thank you so much." A man and woman, still visibly shaken, spoke in heavily accented English. "We're Elliot and Sophia from Kent. We were hiking in Yorkshire. We didn't expect." The man trailed off as he stared at the scorched pit. A tall, dark-skinned, middle-aged man, disheveled but with keen eyes, stepped forward next. "John Cronin, Australian Dragon Sanctuary. Thank you for saving us. I was ambushed by those beasts during a field survey." His disgust for the werewolves was plain, and his gaze flicked to Sargeras with unmistakable curiosity. Finally, 2 very young East Asian faces approached. Their robes, though singed and torn, bore fine embroidery. They performed the ancient cupped hand salute with respectful precision. One of the youths spoke in slightly hesitant English. "Thank you for saving our lives. We are students from Kunlun Academy of Magic. I am Ye, and she is Shui." They looked at Sargeras with blazing eyes and awe. "If you had not intervened, we would have been sacrifices on that altar." Kunlun's School of Magic? The question dropped like a stone. Heads turned. Even Lupin's expression betrayed surprise. To most Western wizards, the Kunlun School in China was as much legend as institution, ancient, reclusive, rarely seen beyond its own borders. It had always been wrapped in mystery. A subtle ripple crossed Sargeras's gray eyes. He looked at the 2 students who had claimed Kunlun as their home, amusement playing at the edges of his gaze. "Kunlun," he repeated softly then, in a flat, careful tone. "Where exactly is your school located?" He asked because he'd tried to find it on his travels. He had combed the Kunlun Mountains and come up with nothing, an omission rare in a career like his. The young man called Ye flinched at the question and exchanged a glance with Shui. Shui, shy, swallowed, and then forced herself into slightly more fluent English. "We're very sorry, Your Excellency," she said. "The school is hidden. It's difficult to describe its location in words. She glanced at Ye, then lowered her voice. "We left without permission." Yi took over, all the heat and impulsiveness of youth mixed with a guilty edge for causing trouble. "We heard Hogwarts was hosting a Tri-Wizard tournament," he said. "Such a big event, schools from all over. We were curious and wanted to see it for ourselves." He hesitated, his tone dropping. "But our school never takes part in those things, so we snuck out. We didn't expect, right after arriving in Britain, when we asked for directions, we ran into those werewolves." Soft, mechanical popping sounds answered him. On the scorched earth at the edge of the clearing, a small, elegant carriage hovered into view, carried by a team of wizards and an attendant whose nickname everyone used, Hummingbird. It was one of St. Mungo's emergency transport vehicles used for difficult cases. "Your ride has arrived," Hummingbird announced. Sargeras relaxed his questioning. "They will make sure you receive proper treatment and care," he said to the 5 survivors. With Tonks and Lupin's help, Elliot, Sophia, John Cronin, and Ye and Jue climbed into the carriage one by one. The doors shut with a soft click. Hummingbird nodded, and the carriage collapsed into a streak of light that vanished into the brightening sky. October at Hogwarts already carried a bite in the air. The Black Lake looked darker, and a thin mist lingered around the castle peaks. Inside, life went on. Students bustling between classes in the Great Hall, tutors preparing lessons, the school arranging for Halloween. That everyday bustle shattered the next morning. When the students filed into the Great Hall for breakfast, the huge notice board at the center was surrounded by a press of bodies and a hum of excited conversation. A new parchment had been posted in the most prominent place, the handwriting elegant and formal. 7 Schools Tournament Announcement. It is hereby announced that on the evening of Halloween this year, delegations from the 7 magical schools participating in this tournament will arrive at Hogwarts, and a welcoming banquet will be held in the Great Hall. Participating schools are as follows: Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, France; Durmstrang Institute, Scandinavia; Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, North America; Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Britain; Ouagadougou School of Magic, Africa; Castello Bruxo School of Magic, South America; Mahuta Koro School of Magic, Oceania. All faculty and students are requested to behave with decorum and to represent Hogwarts with courtesy and hospitality. Headmaster's Office. Merlin's oversized knickers, 7 schools. Ron shoved his way to the front, scattering people, and, in his excitement, splattering pumpkin juice across the floor. This Uagado, aren't they the ones who supposedly don't use wands? Harry's eyes were wide. He leaned forward on the bench. Siemus, chewing furiously on a piece of bread as if it might help him think, frowned. Sounds like it. But this Castello Bruxo, I've never even heard of it. That's normal, Ron said without turning. I hadn't heard of half of them either. Ginny, her red hair a shimmer in the morning light, leaned in between Harry and Ron, delighted. Did you know? I read that Ilvermorny has 4 houses, Thunderbird, Wampus, Horned Serpent, and Pukwudgie. Pukwudgie? Ron made a face. Who'd want to be in a house named after a Pukwudgie? That's unlucky. It's Pukwudgie, Ron, Hermione said from behind them, half amused, half exasperated. She had a thick book under her arm, a history of world magical education, and pointed to it with one finger. Ilvermorny's houses are Thunderbird, representing the soul, Wampus, representing the body, Horned Serpent, representing the mind, and Pukwudgie, representing the heart. They're based on North American magical creatures, not garden pests. You already know all that? Harry asked, not surprised. Of course, Hermione said, opening the book to show them the brief entry. She was pleased, not smug, just in her element. A drawling voice cut across the table. A very lively discussion, Weasley. Malfoy sauntered over with Goyle in tow. You lot practicing how to welcome the diverse guests? Especially that school that doesn't use wands. Sounds rather backward. We'll be learning wandless magic soon anyway, Ron shot back. We're in our 4th year. If you think you're so clever, why don't you learn it first? Malfoy was about to answer when a sound from the staff table quieted the hall. Professor McGonagall stood and tapped a spoon against her goblet. The sharp note silenced every corner of the great hall. Attention, please, she said. Her voice left no room for argument. The specific rules, restrictions, and the method for selecting champions for the Triwizard Tournament will be announced collectively at the Halloween banquet once all participating schools have arrived. Her eyes swept the room, lingering briefly between the Gryffindor and Slytherin tables. Until then, I expect every student at Hogwarts to behave with proper decorum. Any conduct that brings embarrassment to the school will be dealt with severely. In short, don't embarrass me, or you'll answer for it. The news spread like wildfire. In every break between classes and down every corridor, students were eagerly talking about the unprecedented list. The excitement even spilled into the classrooms. That afternoon, in Advanced Charm Theory, Sargeras had just finished explaining a complex counter-curse principle and announced the end of class when a few bolder 7th years didn't immediately begin packing. They nudged each other until a Ravenclaw girl stood and spoke up. Professor Greengrass, she pleaded, we saw the announcement about the 7 schools taking part in the tournament. Many of us know very little about those schools. Could you, just for a moment, tell us about them? Her request was echoed around the room. Curious, eager faces turned to Sargeras at the podium. He scanned the young faces, and after a pause, smiled slightly. The curiosity in their eyes reminded him of his own youthful hunger for the wider world. Yes, he said, closing the textbook in his hand. Those who need to leave may do so. Those who want to listen should return to their seats. A muffled cheer and the scrape of chairs filled the classroom as everyone settled back down. Sargeras looked around. Everyone had stayed, even a few younger wizards auditing the class. He walked to the front and, with a flick of his wand, a faint holographic world map shimmered into the air. Beauxbatons, he began, pointing to the Pyrenees. In southern France, its headmistress is Madame Olympe Maxime. The school prizes elegance in the arts. Its castle is adorned with fay-like gardens and an atmosphere of refinement. His tone was calm. He moved his wand and a light on the map drifted north. Durmstrang, on the northern Scandinavian peninsula, a school known for rigorous study of the dark arts and strong martial traditions. It does not admit Muggleborns. He left out some of the darker rumors. The light spot hopped to North America. Ilvermorny, on Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, founded by Iseult Sayre and her no-mage husband, James Stewart. Its house system resembles Hogwarts but bears an American practicalness and emphasis on innovation. A student raised a hand. Professor, what is a no-mage? It's a muggle, Sargeras replied evenly. In the United States, wizards often call non-magical people nomads. The map's light moved to Africa and flared. Ouagadougou, believed to be the oldest school of magic, in the Mountains of the Moon in Uganda, famous for its use of gesture and language-based magic, and for producing exceptional transfiguration talent, animagi, and the like. The spot slid to South America, Castelo Bruxo, deep in the Brazilian rainforest. Its teachers and students excel in magical zoology, herbology, and astronomy. They're deeply connected to the region's magical flora and fauna and are renowned for healing magic. The light drifted to Oceania and rested over Australia. There's a school located in the heart of Uluru Katachuta National Park. Its curriculum draws on ancient Aboriginal traditions and the unique Pacific environment. Environmental magic, illusion, and sea-related magic are its strengths. It enrolls students from across Oceania. Finally, the map returned to Britain. Hogwarts, he said with a small lift of his voice, which needs no introduction. Each description set off a low murmur of surprise and discussion. Sargeras's account was spare but precise, sketching each school's character and opening a new window on the wider magical world. "So, Professor," another student asked eagerly, "which of these schools is the strongest?" Sargeras regarded the questioner with his gray eyes, his tone steady. "There is no single strongest school, only wizards who are more skilled in certain areas. Power manifests in many ways. Ouagadou's wandless magic may rival Durmstrang's offensive training. Castelo Bruxo's understanding of natural magic might surpass Ilvermorny's practical spells. True strength is breadth and depth of knowledge, not a simple rank." His words gave a thoughtful close to the impromptu overview. Class dismissed. Now go and eat. He gathered his books, but a swarm of students still hung around him, pressing for more. "Professor, are there other schools in the world? How do wizards live in those places? Are there strange kinds of magic?" Sargeras paused, took in the hopeful faces, including a few usually reserved Hufflepuffs, and instead of brushing them off, he turned. "Let's talk as we walk," he said. That tacit permission sent the students clustering around him like planets following a star. They chatted and jostled as they moved through the castle corridors. When they reached the Great Hall, dinner was already underway. The long tables were piled with food, and the hall smelled of roasted meat and pumpkin juice. Professors at the staff table exchanged curious looks. Sagres Greengrass, being the focus of such eager attention, was uncommon. He didn't go to the staff table. Instead, he made his way to the Ravenclaw table, taking an empty seat at the far end, the spot he'd favored as a student. He helped himself to roast beef and vegetables, while students from Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and even Slytherin crowded around him. "How many magic schools are there in the world?" a Ravenclaw girl asked. Sargeras cut his meat with a knife and answered without looking up. "The International Confederation of Wizards officially recognizes 11 major schools. The 7 you heard about today are among them." He continued, letting his words paint new images. "There's Koldov Storets in Russia, famed for cold magics and ancient Slavic witchcraft. Mahutukoro in Japan, a floating palace where students are often guided by dream eaters before enrollment. The Salzburg Academy in Austria, its students tend to be seers, animagi, and magical artists, skilled in astronomy and dream magic, and Kunlun School in China, which emphasizes internal forms of magic, what they call qi, and is known for talismans, charm scripts, and a unique branch of potion craft, often called elixir crafting." He spoke calmly, and his descriptions seemed to conjure snow-capped fortresses and palaces among the clouds in the imaginations of his listeners. "So, are there any particularly strange kinds of magic?" a Gryffindor boy asked, leaning forward. "The definition of strange depends on your point of view," Professor Sagres Greengrass replied, casually wiping his mouth with a napkin. "In Egypt, some old alchemical families still pass down the art of combining spells with sand to make temporary sand miracles. Far into the Amazon, there are isolated witch doctors who, through symbiosis with certain magical plants, cast fragrant charms that shape dreams and emotions." He paused and let the shocked faces around the table take that in. Magic isn't only wands and incantations. Ouagadou's gestures, Castelo Bruxo's plant essences, Ukaro's resonance with the land, each is a different expression of the same force. Even in remote parts of Northern Europe, wizards study the fundamental power of runic engravings. And muggles? Another student asked. Do they notice any of this? Not entirely, Sargeras said evenly. Many muggle myths and legends spring from blurred glimpses of our world. Supernatural sightings or unsolved oddities are sometimes just ripples of magic leaking through. He continued, answering question after question while he ate. Other tables fell silent and leaned in. Portraits hushed their chatter, and strangers in the great hall edged closer. Even several professors set down their cutlery to listen. For a time, the house divisions dissolved. Hogwarts had become a kind of magic salon, curiosity humming in the air. After telling a few more stories about off-the-map wizard gatherings that the International Confederation ignored, Sargeras looked up to see Dumbledore approaching with a smile. Sargeras, there's something I'd like to discuss about the Halloween decorations, Dumbledore said hesitantly. I know you have very particular aesthetic senses. This year is special. We have many guests coming from afar. I'd like the castle to be festive, but not, well, too terrifying. Some of our visitors and younger students are sensitive to darker motifs. Sargeras nodded. Understood. I'll make it welcoming while showing how inclusive Hogwarts can be. Dumbledore seemed poised to add something, but seeing Sargeras's calm assurance, he only smiled. Very good. I'll leave it in your hands. As Halloween approached, the castle changed in small ways at first. The suits of armor looked battle-worn. Portraits murmured more of distant myths. But on Halloween Eve, every teacher and student discovered that Professor Greengrass's idea of not too terrifying was not the ordinary kind. Under Sargeras's enchantments, Hogwarts had become a bizarre, beautiful fusion of the haunted aesthetics of the world's great schools of magic. Each decoration carried meaning, exotic, uncanny, and playful in equal measure. The entrance hall and the corridor to the Great Hall were swallowed by a roiling sea of blood-red foam. A Viking longship with tattered sails plowed through the waves. Its hull was woven of ice and bones, and translucent Norse sailors stood frozen on deck. The most startling touch came when the one-eyed ghost captain barked orders and fired glowing grappling hooks. The hooks snagged passing students, hoisted them up amid blood-colored waves, while the captain laughed hoarsely. Ha! Another brave soul has completed his voyage, and then gently deposited them at the far end of the corridor. Each raided student found a chest of gold coins at their feet, chocolates wrapped in gold foil. Sargeras guessed the Durmstrang students would feel a little at home. Winged skeleton fairies flitted through the castle, graceful but unsettling, with blue flames burning in their empty eye sockets. They offered small bone baskets of giggling skull candies. Once accepted, the candies followed their owner with chittering little laughs until eaten. If refused, the fairies clustered and danced a mournful dance around the refuser. Sargeras suspected Boban students would adore these strange flower fairies. In tucked-away corners and outside disused classrooms, miniature versions of the Giza pyramids rose from the stone. Mummy guardians, wrapped in ancient linen, did not attack. They spoke riddles in an archaic Egyptian tongue, questions about magical African creatures and plants. Answer correctly, and a tiny gift, a twitching chocolate scorpion, would fly from within the pyramid. Answer wrong, and a gust of sandy wind blew, covering the unfortunate student in a fine, unshakable magical dust. The mechanism echoed an entrance test from the Uagadou library, and Sargeras hoped it would tug fondly at some students' memories. The herbology classrooms and the paths to the greenhouses had turned into a humid, tangled rainforest. Vines wound around moss-covered gravestones that whispered the lives of the dead. Passing students sometimes felt a vine slip around an ankle or wrist, not to harm, but to hold them gently until they listened to a story. This came straight from Castellabruxo's jungles. Sargeras had spent days there, listening to the tombstone's whispers, hunting clues about hidden magical ruins. Low atriums were shrouded in swamp mist. The floor rippled like water so that every step made waves. Illusory, long-horned water serpent ghosts bobbed through the shallows, examining passersby with curious heads. Thunderstorms raged across ceilings, the skeletal shadow of a thunderbird streaking through the lightning. Occasionally, a safe bolt of lightning would tap a student's head, leaving their hair spectacularly on end. Grim, mischievous Pukwudgie goblin statues winked, sometimes teaming up with cat-leopard phantoms to chase squealing students, touches meant so that every Ilvermorny pupil could find the totem of their house. The astronomy tower and upper corridors became a red desert like Uluru. The ceiling opened into a brilliant star field, but the constellations shifted into patterns of ancient Australian creatures, thylacine ghosts racing across the dunes. Phosphorescent boomerang spirits whirred out, circling young wizards and dropping small opal-like candies before vanishing. Sand paintings shifted beneath feet. Step on the right tile, and a short, eerie story flickered to life. Even Hogwarts' familiar features were given a twist. Pumpkins roared like winter beasts, spewing harmless but oddly fragrant black smoke. Moving staircases delighted in steering people through cobwebbed, haunted detours before returning them to their route. Suits of armor took turns singing off-key horror songs. Sargeras watched students scream and laugh in the maze of interactions. The whole effect, he believed, fulfilled Dumbledore's brief. It honored each school's culture while keeping the night fun and interactive. The decorations were neither gratuitously gory nor bluntly frightening. They evoked mystery, history, and a comfortable sense of home for visitors from abroad. If some younger Hogwarts students found it all a little overwhelming, Sargeras told himself it was only a gentle lesson in the variety of the magical world. He had not invented these ideas from nothing. As he had told the eager students, his travels, sometimes uninvited, through the legendary schools of magic supplied every detail now bewitched into the castle. Dumbledore toured the transformed rooms with a complicated expression unreadable behind his half-moon spectacles. "Sargeras," he said at last, "I must admit these arrangements are very creative. They do, to a large extent, show respect for each school's culture." "True belonging comes from deep cultural experience and exchange," Sargeras replied. Dumbledore watched a Castellabruxo vine curl around a pillar and then added softly, would it be possible to change the shape of the skeleton fairies' candies? They're a limited-time Halloween piece, inspired by Beauxbaton's flower fairy tales," Sargeras said easily. "It's in keeping with the theme." Dumbledore blinked, then dropped the subject. At dinner, the Great Hall buzzed with stories of ghost ships and skeleton fairies until Dumbledore rose from the faculty table. He tapped his goblet, and the hall quieted. Even students whose ankles were being gently held by vines craned forward. Clad in purple robes embroidered with stars and moons, he smiled and began. "Please allow me a few minutes." His voice was soft but carried. "Before you continue exploring our most characterful Halloween decorations, there are a few important things about tomorrow." He let that hang a beat, then announced, "First, and most importantly, tomorrow we will welcome distinguished guests and competing teams from 6 major magical schools." He let that sink in, and then added, "Therefore, all students must wear neat Hogwarts uniforms all day." He emphasized the words. "This is not to stifle individuality, but to show our unity and the spirit of hospitality. I want our guests' first impression to be of proud, spirited Hogwarts students." A ripple ran through the hall. Many students tidied their robes. Malfoy's cuffs were suddenly straighter. "Secondly," Dumbledore went on, "classes will end early at 2 in the afternoon. After that, please assemble on the lawn by the lake, led by your heads of house. We will welcome our guests together." At the thought of the incoming delegations, excitement and curiosity lit every face. "As for how our guests will arrive," Dumbledore said, a twinkle in his eye, "I shall keep a little mystery. I can promise it will be unforgettable. Please maintain order and refrain from shouting or crowding. We would not want to disturb some, sensitive modes of magical transport." A few students chuckled. Dumbledore smiled his familiar mischievous smile. "Finally, friendship first, competition second. In the days to come, whether you are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, or Slytherin, remember you represent Hogwarts. Treat our visitors with courtesy. Use this chance to meet peers from across the world. What you learn from them may be as valuable as any lesson." He lifted a cup of what looked like clear lemonade. "Let us hope everything goes smoothly tomorrow. Let us look forward to a warm, friendly, and unforgettable event. Enjoy your unique Halloween Eve." Applause and excited chatter rippled through the Great Hall as the students resumed their feasting, already trading theories about the mysterious arrivals to come. Chapter 325, 7 Schools Gathered. In the early morning light, Hogwarts had shed the menacing air it had worn overnight, though it still retained that peculiar charm that somehow blended the styles of 7 different schools. As the notice had instructed, everyone had changed into neat school uniforms. The grounds hummed with a festive mixture of tension and excitement. Lessons were deliberately shortened for the day, and by the golden afternoon, the whole school, teachers and students, had assembled in orderly lines on the great lawn beside the Black Lake, waiting for the arrivals. Professor McGonagall's stern gaze swept over the crowd. Those under it fell silent. "Weasley, straighten your hat," she snapped at Ron. "Miss Patil, take that ridiculous thing out of your hair." Parvati frowned and removed a large butterfly ornament from the end of her braid. "First years to the front, no pushing," McGonagall continued. The sky was a clear blue. A soft breeze rippled the lake, tossing the sunlight into glittering patterns. Students stood by house in low conversations, their eyes darting to the water and the horizon, wondering how the guests would arrive. At the front, Headmaster Dumbledore stood with his silver beard lightly stirred by the wind and a patient smile on his face. Then, whoo! A deep, piercing horn blast echoed from the north and cut through the quiet. "Look, in the lake!" a Gryffindor shouted, pointing with trembling fingers. The center of the Black Lake boiled and churned, huge splashes throwing water high into the air. Slowly, as if emerging from the deep, a massive mast and tattered sails rose from a great whirlpool. A ghostly ship, sea-logged and strange, creaked out of the water, its hull pocked with holes and its portholes faintly phosphorescent. "Merlin's beard," Seamus Finnegan breathed. "Even though I've seen it before, I still want to know, how does it not sink?" "Don't be so pathetic, Seamus. It's magic," Ron muttered. The battered vessel eased up to shore. People in heavy fur cloaks began to disembark, led by a pale man wrapped in silver-white fur, Igor Karkaroff. The Durmstrang students followed in solemn silence, faces hard and serious beyond their years. They paused on the shore, not to join the welcoming party, but to look southward as one. "What's that? A cloud?" A Ravenclaw girl squinted and asked. A brilliantly colored shape floated across the sky. As it drew closer, the crowd saw it was not a cloud at all, but an enormous magic carpet, its borders stitched with intricate geometric designs, carrying dozens of young men and women in vivid robes. Sunlight struck the carpet and refracted in iridescent patterns. "It's Wagadoo," Hermione whispered, nearly bouncing with excitement. "The book said they travel by magic carpet?" Harry asked, eyes following the smooth arc of the carpet. "The book didn't say," Hermione replied. "Then how do you know?" Ron asked. "Because the carpet was full of dark-skinned students," she said irritably, making Harry and Ron stick out their tongues. "They've enchanted the carpet. Muggles probably just see a cloud." Her tone was confident. Around them, the gathered students murmured with genuine admiration. "This entrance is much more cheerful than that broken ship," someone observed. "Quiet, Mr. Finnegan," McGonagall snapped at Seamus, who had been gawking. No sooner had the Wagado carpet arrived than the sky tore open again with color. A colossal rainbow-colored serpent, its scales flashing in every hue, wound through the clouds with a slow, graceful motion. A faint, ancient melody rode the wind, earthy and oceanic at once. Students stared, wide-eyed. "That's you, Carlo," someone, Sargeras, said softly. "They travel on a rainbow snake." "It looks like one of those glowing jelly sweets," a first-year murmured, rapt. "Then you're probably the glowing jelly sweet in its eyes," Snape drawled from nearby, his caustic humor earning a very pale look from a Hufflepuff boy. From the west came clear, bell-like notes. 12 sleek, rune-decorated horses trotted in, drawing an ornate carriage enshrouded in a mist that flashed like diamonds. "Beauxbatons," the crowd breathed, stirred once more by the carriage's elegance. Parvati Patil looked genuinely enchanted. At the same moment, something odd happened on the open ground in front of the castle. Green shoots pierced the earth, and as if awakened, burst into branches and leaves, growing at a fantastical rate until a towering tree arched over the lawn. Its limbs twisted like living vines to form a vibrant green gateway, and there were small flickering flames within the arch. A group of students in emerald and earth-toned robes stepped out smelling of damp soil and living plants. "Castelabruso students travel through plant passages," Professor Flitwick explained, turning so the younger ones could hear. "It's an advanced use of natural magic." A booming drum summons attention next. The clouds began to spin, then swirl, forming a towering vortex. At its heart, a thunderbird, storm and lightning clinging to its feathers, stretched enormous wings. On its broad back stood a cohort of young men and women in deep blue and berry red uniforms, faces bright and confident. "Ilvermorny," someone shouted. "Oh, my goodness! How can there be such a huge thunderbird?" A student whispered. "Is there a chance?" Another began. Snape's cold voice cut in, dismissive. He glanced at the student who had spoken, contempt plain on his face. "That chance is, perhaps, that it is merely a magical construct in the form of a thunderbird?" The student's face flushed scarlet. Others who had been tempted to ask similar questions were silently glad they had kept quiet. The 7 schools had arrived, and the lawn thrummed with the strange, wonderful babble of magic from across the globe. Chapter 326, Feeling at Home. 6 schools arrived, each with a distinct, astonishing entrance, and the Hogwarts students watched with wide eyes as gasps rose and fell through the great hall. Professor McGonagall cast a warning look that swept across the crowd, curbing the louder impulses to comment. Once all the delegations had taken their places, Headmaster Dumbledore stepped forward, arms open and a warm smile on his face. "Welcome, welcome, friends from afar," he called, his voice ringing with a gentle authority that captured every ear. "On this day of surprises, Hogwarts is honored to receive you. I hope you feel at home here, and that together we will write a new chapter in the history of the tournament. Indeed, the 7-school tournament." As his words drifted away, the castle gates eased open. Enthusiastic, rippling applause filled the air, coming not only from Hogwarts, but from the visiting teachers and students as well. Faces shone with infectious excitement and broad smiles. Sagres stood among the faculty, watching calmly. Whether it was the seemingly implacable Karkaroff, the graceful Madame Maxime, the white-bearded Thunderbird principal, or the other 3 heads, every one of them showed a measure of respect, and Sagres noted a faint, almost imperceptible awe when Dumbledore spoke. The younger students looked at the legendary wizard with near worship. The 6 principals strolled over together, and Dumbledore greeted Karkaroff, who walked at the front. "Igor, coming all the way from the North Sea, you must have seen many magnificent seascapes. I hope the Scottish storms were not too troublesome." Karkaroff forced a stiff smile and stroked his fur collar. "Storms are merely embellishments to the Durmstrang journey, Albus." Dumbledore chuckled, then turned to Madame Maxime. "Olympe, I imagine the autumn colors here must differ from Beauxbaton." "It has a singular charm," she said, inclining her head. Her smile faded for a moment as she glanced at the faint, eerie decorations on the castle's outer walls. "The closer you get, the more unusual the atmosphere." "Ah, that's our special Halloween arrangement," Dumbledore replied with a blink, artfully smoothing things over. He turned to the black woman who led Uagadou. "Harriet, long time no see." "It has been a long time, Albus," Harriet replied, smiling in a way that carried meaning. "The last time we met was in 1945. You look much older now." Dumbledore returned a mischievous grin. 50 years have a way of doing that. He addressed the Thunderbird principal of Ilvermorny next. "Wouldn't you agree, Belicna?" Belicna puffed up with vigor. "I'm afraid I cannot answer that, Albus. I'm only 106, very much in my prime. Unlike you, an old man of over 110. A ripple of knowing smiles passed among the principals. Alfonso Oliveira, the elder of Castello Bruxo, chuckled along. As a fellow American school head, he seemed to share a rapport with Belicna. The Thunderbird nodded toward Sagres, who returned the nod. The small gesture was noticed but left unremarked. "We hope we aren't late, Headmaster Dumbledore," Yaram Coffeeot of Ouagadou said smoothly. "We encountered an unexpected air current over the channel. Viendo had to take a detour." "You're perfectly on time, Yaram," Dumbledore replied, his tone gentle. Then, with a twinkle of curiosity, he asked, "Pray tell, what does Viendo eat?" Yaram beamed. "Mostly dew and sunlight, a little of the student's sweet dreams. It eats even less than a rune spore." "What a marvelous creature," Dumbledore said earnestly as he looked up at the giant, iridescent serpent. "Hogwarts' care of magical creatures professor will be fascinated." Dumbledore had a knack for putting everyone at ease, even in a gathering of such disparate minds. After a few more pleasantries, his blue eyes warmed with invitation. It appears everyone has had a memorable journey. That is what this meeting is for, to share sights and broaden our view of the magical world. Shall we continue our conversation inside? I imagine you are curious about the castle's interior, and the house elves are eager to present their fare. Led by Dumbledore and the principals, the procession moved into the entrance hall. Gasps rose again. A ghost ship sailed in a sea of blood high above them, miniature pyramids drifted in the air, and sands hung like dust motes between the banners. "How is this done?" one of the Uagadou principals asked aloud, pausing under the apparition. Another Uagadou head reached out to the floating sand and laughed softly. "Quite an ancient technique," she murmured. Students from every school watched with open mouths, eyes sparkling. An Ilvermorny boy glanced at the long-horned water snake ghost that slithered from a swamp illusion and said in an American accent, "This is much more fun than our night of terrors." A Bosbotans girl, whispering in halting English to a Hogwarts student, asked, "How did they do all this?" "It's all Professor Greengrass," the Hogwarts girl answered proudly. "He decorates the castle differently every year. He's brilliant at it." Greengrass. The name passed quietly from mouth to mouth. For many, it was no longer unfamiliar. Since the Quidditch World Cup earlier that year, Sagres Greengrass had left a deep impression. Hogwarts students treated his feats as a matter of course, recounting tales of his past decorations like proud tradition. "It's even better at Christmas," a Hufflepuff piped up. "Everyone gets presents, and the suits of armor sing carols." "And 2 years ago at Halloween," a Gryffindor added, "giant pumpkin lanterns roamed the castle and swallowed people whole before spitting them back out." The visiting students blinked at these stories and let their surprise melt into envy. Some Beauxbatons and Durmstrang pupils, remembering the battles they had fought in the Great Hall in past years, immediately asked after Peeves. Their teachers exchanged looks and informed them, with a mix of relief and amusement, that Peeves had been locked in the arena, leaving the visitors uncertain whether to be pleased or disappointed. Chapter 327, Dinner. The procession moved slowly and, a moment later, finally reached the entrance to the Great Hall. Filch was frantically adding an exquisitely carved wooden chair to the end of the staff table. Moody stood aside, leaning on his cane. At first glance, many students from the other schools even mistook him for part of the Halloween decorations. When the last student, a boy from Castellabruxo, eyes wide as he took in the sights, sat at the long table adorned with tropical flowers, the hall fell into an expectant hush. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, punctuated by hushed gasps in many accents, turned as one to the enchanted ceiling, where constellations and the totems of the 7 schools danced across a deep night sky. It was breathtaking. Professor Dumbledore rose from the center of the staff table, his silver hair and beard seeming to gleam under the magical starlight. He didn't need a wand, his gentle, clear voice carried to every corner of the great hall. "The ancient castle welcomes new friends," he said, smiling as his gaze swept over the young faces. "The empty tables long to be shared. I believe good food is the most moving universal language. Let us not disappoint the house elves' efforts, nor this wonderful evening." He clapped softly. "Let the feast begin." In an instant, tabletops that had been bare were heaped with a glittering array of dishes. This was not merely Hogwarts' usual spread, but a magical culinary exhibition blending flavors from around the world. On the Hogwarts tables were classic British fare, perfectly roasted beef, Yorkshire puddings, giant roast potatoes, and shepherd's pie, slick with rich gravy. Durmstrang's tables offered a hearty Nordic style, generous platters of smoked and cured fish, dense rye bread, venison stew fragrant with warming spices, and a sapphire blue berry dessert that gave off a faint chill. Beauxbaton served a French feast, bouillabaisse, delicate puff trees, coq au vin, assorted cheeses, and elegant macarons and eclairs in a rainbow of colors. Uagadou's tables carried exotic aromas, slow-cooked spiced lamb, a cassava cake known as fufu, grilled plantains, and a magical fruit salad that pulsed subtly and tasted sweet and sour. Ilvermorny showcased New World flavors, huge roasted turkeys, pumpkin pie, cornbread, and pancakes drenched in maple syrup. The table even featured Muggle favorites like hamburgers and cola. Castellabruxo brought the essence of the rainforest, grilled fish with passion fruit sauce, black bean rice, cheese bread balls made from tapioca, and refreshing drinks served in hollowed-out pineapples. Mahutokoro's table displayed oceanic specialties, grilled kangaroo steaks, lamington cakes, and a beverage that smelled of jungle flowers and glowed like a sunset. Merlin, Ron Weasley stared, eyes wide, at the enormous steaks on the Durmstrang table. Do they eat this every day? No wonder they're all so strong. The students had been a little guarded at first, but the food quickly softened the mood. They pointed with curiosity at unfamiliar dishes on neighboring tables, asked each other questions, and boldly bartered tastes. At the staff table, the mood was equally warm. Dumbledore was recommending Hogwarts treacle tart to the other headmasters. Madame Maxime took a delicate bite, smiled, and waved away the offer when it proved too sweet for her. Professor Flitwick was excitedly discussing the challenges of precision in wandless magic with Ouagadoug's head. Professor Sprout conversed about tropical magical herbs with Castello Bruxo's principal. Karkaroff and Snape murmured together, occasionally shooting glances at the displeased Moody. Just as students were licking frosting from their fingers or whispering about an unforgettable dish from the next table, the Great Hall doors opened again. Another group entered and drew every head. Leading them was Barty Crouch, head of the Ministry's Department of International Magical Cooperation, his face even more severe than usual and lined with wariness. Beside him came Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, his round face split by an enthusiastic grin as he waved to the students. But most striking of all was the stranger who followed them. He wore a smooth, dark blue silk robe and carried himself with calm refinement. A few silver threads glinted in his black hair, though his face did not look old. He was accompanied by a boy and a girl, both around 16 or 17, and dressed in traditional Eastern attire, their expressions full of curiosity. Sargeras watched them with a playful glint in his eyes. The two young wizards were the survivors he had rescued from the werewolf camp. Dumbledore rose and greeted the newcomers warmly. "Barty, Ludo, was your journey smooth? And Mr. Chang," he added to the out-of-place stranger, "welcome you and your students to Hogwarts. Your arrival makes this event all the more complete." The man called Mr. Chang bowed slightly and replied in fluent English. "Headmaster Dumbledore, please forgive our unannounced arrival. I hope we have not caused any disturbance." "The honor is ours," Dumbledore said sincerely, and signaled the house elves to bring a few extra chairs to the staff table. The three East Asian wizards ignored curious looks and walked straight to Sargeras' side to express their gratitude. Sargeras shook his head calmly, downplaying it as a small favor. It seemed that everyone rescued from the werewolf camp had come through all right, though the two young people appeared to have had their parents notified. At the long tables, students whispered and speculated about the newcomers, most of them focusing on the three East Asian faces. "Who are they?" Lee Jordan asked, frowning. "Why are those two sitting with the professors? They sound like Chinese wizards." "No, Fred offered. "Could it be the Kunkun school the professor mentioned?" "Kunlun School of Magic," George corrected immediately. By the time the banquet was winding down, the atmosphere was electric. The house elves, as if sensing the mood, timed the disappearance of the puddings and trifles to perfection. When Dumbledore rose and faced the staff and students, the Great Hall fell instantly silent. "Friends, students," his voice rolled clear across the hall. "The end of the banquet means that our true main event for tonight is about to begin. I am honored to announce that this year's Seven Champions tournament will officially commence this very moment." Applause and cheers burst out. Hogwarts students whooped and craned forward in their seats. When the noise had died a little, Dumbledore continued. "First, a few clarifications. The tournament exists to foster communication and understanding between different magical traditions. Accordingly, throughout the term in which the competition takes place, yes, this will be a long and exciting undertaking lasting until the end of the school year. Student representatives from the participating schools will attend classes with Hogwarts students, study together, and take part in in-depth exchanges." The announcement provoked excited murmurs. That news pleased many, though it would not thrill some younger wizards. Dumbledore went on. "Secondly, as encouragement and recompense for those who compete," he said, "the Hogwarts champion will be exempt from all exams this year. A huge gasp rose from the Hogwarts tables. Ron's eyes nearly popped out. He grabbed Harry's sleeve. Harry, did you hear that? 1,000 galleons. Every time I hear that number, my heart nearly bursts. Hermione scowled. Ron, is that all you think about? That's not the point. It's dangerous. Remember the tournament of 1792? A basilisk went out of control, and even 3 headmasters were injured. I know it's dangerous, Ron mumbled distractedly, his gaze already skimming the ceiling as if counting coins. But 1,000 galleons. He lowered his voice, dreaming aloud. Fred and George reckon they've got some aging potion. Think, if we... Hermione spun on him, her hazel eyes flashing. Ron Weasley, you're not actually thinking of cheating with some stupid aging potion, are you? Besides breaking the rules, the side effects could be horrendous. Don't be ridiculous. Money isn't worth risking your life. Ron flushed. I was only saying, it's not like I only care about money. Hermione's expression softened a fraction. Being a champion is glorious, yes, but it means facing real danger. Yeah, and no homework, no exams, Ron muttered, not quite giving up the fantasy. Hermione's face began to cloud again, and Harry, seeing the argument threatening to flare up, quickly intervened. All right, Hermione, Ron was only saying... At that moment, Filch came huffing down the staff table, carrying a jewel-encrusted wooden box. He set it carefully before Dumbledore and retreated. The great hall fell completely still. Every eye was on the box. Even Ron's dreams of galleons paused. Dumbledore lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of deep blue velvet, sat an ancient wooden goblet. Many of you already know, he said, that the one who chooses the champions is a fair and impartial selector. He reached in and took the goblet. It is the Goblet of Fire. The cup looked unremarkable at first, a rough-hewn wooden vessel, but blue-white flames licked inside it. Any student who wishes to be a champion must place a slip of parchment with their name and school into the fire within this goblet. He let his gaze sweep across the hall, meeting faces filled with eagerness or apprehension. Tomorrow night, the Goblet of Fire will choose the champions it considers most worthy to represent their schools. 1 from each school, 7 in all. His voice turned grave. I must stress, and I require you all to understand, once chosen by the Goblet of Fire, you enter into a contract and must complete all the tasks of the tournament. This is not a matter of whims. An ancient magic is at work here that cannot be broken. He fixed them with a sharp look. So before you cast your names, think very carefully. Consider whether you are truly prepared to face what may come. His words were like cold water on many bright hopes. At the staff table, Professor Chang from the Kunlun School of Magic leaned close to Professor McGonagall, speaking in a low voice. A little farther away, a young man and woman whispered in Chinese, evidently believing no one in the foreign hall could understand them. They relaxed a little, smiling at one another. The young man Ye watched the blue-white flames intently and murmured to Shui, "Should we give it a try?" Shui glanced at the goblet, hesitant. We're old enough, but the teacher only brought us to observe. Wouldn't it be improper? Oh, it's a rare chance, Ye said, nudging her elbow with a mischievous smile. Even if we put our names in, the goblet might ignore us. We're already here. They whispered a moment longer, coming to some quiet agreement. Realizing they might have been a little forward, they turned toward Sagres, who had been watching them. They offered shy, apologetic smiles. Sagres, expression composed and almost older than his years, nodded gently. He had heard everything but said nothing. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the Goblet of Fire in the center of the hall, as if the flames alone deserved his attention. Chapter 329, Dinner Ends. Dumbledore waited until his voice carried across the hall and everyone had heard him before he continued. Tonight, the Goblet of Fire will be placed in the center of the entrance hall for all eligible students to submit their names, and to emphasize the seriousness of the selection and to stop younger students from giving in to temptation. He paused, and his gaze slid toward the Gryffindor table with a faint, mischievous glint. I will draw an age line around the goblet. Anyone under the age of 17 who attempts to cross it will be politely turned away. He gave a small, satisfied clap. Very well. The feast is officially over. Hogwarts prefects, please lead the students back to your common rooms in an orderly fashion. Students from the guest schools, you may return to your accommodations. Have a comfortable night. Chairs scraped and footsteps rose in a tide. Uniforms in every imaginable color flowed toward the doors. In the entrance hall, the goblet already sat on a stone pillar. A faint golden glow, like drifting motes of light, traced a ring on the floor around it. Students split off toward the places prepared for their schools. Ilvermorny's Thunderbird, a vast magical construct, stood like a statue, wings unfurled to support two roomy tents bearing the school's crest. Castello Bruxo pupils walked toward a towering tree beside the castle, its trunk and vines forming natural wooden doorways. The head of Uagado unfurled a huge enchanted carpet that folded and wove itself into a magnificent tent, all exotic patterns and quiet grandeur. Mahudakoro's students filed silently toward a sleeping enormous serpent and entered, one by one, through its open mouth. Durmstrang's contingent prepared to return to their phantom ship moored on the Black Lake. The spectacle widened the Hogwarts students' horizons. They watched with wide eyes, scarcely able to take it all in. Beside the Durmstrang group, a knot of younger wizards held scraps of parchment and clamored around Victor Krum, trying to get his autograph. "What's the point of this?" Hermione asked from the edge of the crowd, arms folded. "Point?" Ron grinned, craning his neck with Harry. "He's Victor Krum. He is the point." Hermione's frown deepened. She didn't understand the fuss. Krum's gaze cut through the crowd and landed on her. She met it without looking away and gave him a frank, unsmiling stare. The look startled him. Karkaroff, the headmaster of Durmstrang, strode forward, face hard, and bellowed at the crowd. "Enough! Back to where you came from. Victor needs rest." His brusque tones scattered the admirers like a gust of wind. Then Karkaroff softened his expression the instant he turned to Krum, adopting an exaggerated concern. "Victor, how are you feeling? The lake breeze is chilly tonight. Should I have someone bring you some mulled wine from the kitchens? It would warm you." Krum shook his head and murmured, "No need, Principal." A Durmstrang boy beside him, encouraged by the display, piped up with false modesty, "Principal, I'd like some mulled wine." Karkaroff's face snapped into contempt. "Do you think this is a holiday, Polyakov?" The faux warmth vanished. He jabbed a finger at the boy. "You've got food on the front of your robes again, you useless oaf. Get back to the ship immediately." The boy went pale and slunk back into the line. Nearby, Sagres, who had been watching, couldn't keep a sharp smile from crossing his face. That was the real Karkaroff. "Disgusting, isn't it?" a rough voice said to his side. Sagres didn't turn, but angled his head to watch Moody hobble along, leaning on his cane. The veteran Auror's magical eye was fixed on where Karkaroff had gone. "You mean our dear Principal Karkaroff?" Sagres said flatly. "Who else?" Moody snorted, his magical eye whirring. "Opportunist through and through. Watching him placate that boy reminds me of how he crawled and begged at the Wizengamot." Sagres raised an eyebrow. "People tend to invest in what they think will protect them, especially after they've backed the wrong horse." Moody's eye swung to him hard. "You know his history well." "Well enough," Sagres answered, watching Karkaroff disappear out the doors. "At least I don't let his current educator act fool me." "Humph. He'd better not try any tricks in my sight," Moody muttered, fingers unconsciously touching his wand. "Some people don't change what they're made of." Sagres shrugged. "You catch him yourself back then?" "Of course." Moody's voice was tight. He was slippery as an eel, but he finally showed his true colors. "It must have been quite the show," Sagres said without much warmth. Moody snorted. "Hardly. He ran and then folded without so much as a fight. To save his own skin, he spat out a dozen names. Spineless." Sagres nodded. He'd heard parts of the story before. The entrance hall emptied, and for a moment there was a soft hush as the last students went on their way. The next morning, sunlight poured through the high windows into the Hogwarts entrance hall. A large crowd of students in a jumble of school uniforms had already gathered around the raised platform where the Goblet of Fire sat. A ring of golden light encircled it, shimmering in the sun like a silent warning to anyone who might try. Hermione stood a little way off, watching the glittering ring with a frown. Ron and Harry craned their necks from the crowd as several tall Durmstrang boys stepped up first and, without trouble, dropped slips of parchment into the goblet. One by one, the older students followed. A 17-year-old Ravenclaw girl drew a long breath, stepped over the ring, and the light accepted her. She let her parchment fall into the blue-white flame, which leapt up for a moment and then calmed. She breathed out, cheeks flushed, and hurried back to the congratulations of her friends. Angelina Johnson swaggered forward and did it. Cedric Diggory did the same. Each new flash of the flame brought low gasps and applause from the assembled students. Seamus muttered from the crowd sourly, "I can't believe he'd risk his handsome looks." Harry blinked. "What did you say?" "Diggory, the pretty one," Seamus said, eyes rolling, "always showing off for the girls." A few Hufflepuffs in the crowd scowled. Ilvermorny students stepped up, Beauxbaton students. Each flicker of the goblet drew discussions and bets. Not everyone managed it. A younger-looking Beauxbaton's girl tried to slip through, but the instant her foot crossed the golden ring, an invisible shove sent her stumbling back. The hall erupted in good-natured laughter as she fled, crimson. Ron watched, puzzled. "Maybe. The aging potion really works," he muttered. "Hush," Hermione snapped, giving him a sharp look. A small commotion cut through the laughter when Fred and George Weasley, followed by Lee Jordan, elbowed their way forward toward the goblet. The twins were grinning, tightly clutching a small vial. "Professor," Lee called under his breath, nodding toward the faintly glowing ring. "Do you think the aging potion will fool it?" Sargeras looked at the ring and then at the twins. "From what I know of Headmaster Dumbledore's wards, most likely not," he said evenly. George brightened. "Maybe he only put one line down because he underestimated us." "Or perhaps," Sargeras said, glancing up at the high castle roof as if considering the headmaster's reach, "you underestimated Dumbledore." "We'll find out by trying," George declared. "Professor, you're not going to stop us?" Sargeras's mouth twitched into a rare smile. "Why should I stop you? Practice is the best way to test the truth. Lessons learned firsthand sometimes matter more than warnings." The twins and Lee clustered, already plotting. "If someone actually succeeds, we split the 1,000 galleons 3 ways, Lee crowed. "Fine," George said. "Between that and the sponsorship our 2 golden emblem holders get from Bronze Feather, we could practically buy a corner of Zonko's. Or fund new products," Fred added. "We're only a few months from 17. He grinned at George. 2 drops each to be safe. They uncorked the vial, tipped their heads back, and drank. Almost at once, their features seemed to sharpen and stretch. They looked suddenly like older teens, faces longer and voices deeper. "It works," Fred crowed, his voice richer. A hand shot up from the crowd. "Can I have the rest?" Ron asked, cheeks pink. He had heard rumors about the potion and wanted to be certain he wasn't left out. Under Sargeras's gaze, he blurted it out again. "There's a lot left. Even Professor Greengrass thinks it's worth a try." "Oh, our little Ronnie wants to be a hero now," George teased, and the crowd joined in. "If you lot can do it, why can't I?" Ron protested. Fred clasped his shoulder solemnly. "Little Ronnie has grown up. Mum will want to know." "How much will you pay for the rest?" George said, feigning business. Lee, who had also drunk, leaned in. "We only spent 2 galleons and 4 sickles on this." 2 galleons, Ron gasped. "This is barely." "Relax," George said smoothly, arms slung around Ron. "You're the fall guy here. The fall guy always pays." "We've knocked 4 sickles off for you," Fred added. "But I'm your brother," Ron protested. "Oh, right," George and Fred said in exaggerated unison, slapping their foreheads. 3 galleons? Harry and Hermione covered smiles. After fierce bargaining, Ron agreed. He would give the twins a Christmas present worth 3 galleons in exchange for the remainder of the potion. He thrust one of the bottles into Harry's hand, slipped the other into his pocket, and turned to his friends. "There's a fair bit. Hermione, I could share." "Do not include me," Hermione snapped. "I am not interested in cheating." The twins strutted up to the ring, cocksure under the eager gazes of the gathered students. "Ready for a demonstration," Fred announced. They stood with their feet together, took a running leap, and soared cleanly over the golden ring. For half a breath, the hall was silent. Then the twins laughed triumphantly, waved to Sargeras, and each produced a crumpled slip of parchment. George unfolded his ostentatiously and announced, "George Weasley, Hogwarts." He let the parchment fall into the flame. The reaction was immediate. 2 dull thuds sounded. A flash of crimson light erupted from the ring, and Fred and George screamed as if struck midair. They were flung backward and hit the flagstones a few feet away. As they sprawled there, White beards burst from their chins with alarming speed, cascading down to their chests. In a heartbeat, they looked like two teenagers who had aged 50 years. The goblets spat their parchments back with a wet poof, the paper smoldering at the edges, and both struck the twins on the forehead. The entrance hall broke into uproarious laughter. Even Sargeras chuckled as he looked at the two of them, groaning and yanking ineffectual beards. "It seems practice has confirmed the conclusion," he said, smiling. "It doesn't work." Chapter 331. Excited Hagrid, Fred, and George hauled themselves up, and when they saw one another's white beards, they dissolved into fresh laughter. "Good morning," they chorused. Dumbledore stepped out of the great hall, smiling at the twins with amusement. Heads turned as the headmaster inspected Fred and George's beards with keen interest. "Good morning, Professor Dumbledore," the twins answered in unison. "I did warn you," Dumbledore said pleasantly, nodding toward the facial hair. "Of course, Professor," they said, nodding eagerly. "But practice is the only way to test whether something works." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "And what did you find?" "Turns out," they both said, rubbing their chests in mock dignity, "the truth has quite a kick." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "You'd better go and see Madame Pomfrey at once. She's already tending to Miss Fawcett and Mr. Summers." They arrived before dawn, eager to add a few years to themselves as well. "All right, Professor, we'll go now." The twins grinned and threaded their way through the crowd toward the hospital wing. Ron gaped after them, then fumbled an aging potion from his pocket. Can I return this?" he asked. "No returns or exchanges once sold," George called back without looking, tugging at his beard. "You'd better start thinking about what to get us for Christmas." Ron stared at the two of them, crestfallen. Harry gave him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Hermione's expression made it plain she thought he had it coming. Professor Greengrass and Dumbledore walked away together, and as they passed Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Professor Greengrass stopped and pointed at the vial in Ron's hand. "A friendly reminder, Mr. Weasley. You are currently holding a gift worth 3 galleons. Ron's face lit up with sudden understanding. A surprised smile spread across him. "Right. I already have a 3-galleon gift." He shook the bottle as if to prove it, eyes bright. "Thank you, Professor Greengrass." Professor Greengrass said nothing more and continued on with Dumbledore through the throng. Morning light strengthened, and the castle's festive mood grew more exuberant by the minute. Students from the other schools drifted through Hogwarts in 2s and 3s, admiring the Halloween decorations, ghost ships floating in a blood-red sea, vine-carved gravestones, and skeleton fairies drifting down the corridors. Many Hogwarts pupils wandered over to see the transports and attractions of the visiting schools. A few brave Gryffindors clambered to survey Durmstrang's imposing ghost ship, while a gaggle of Hufflepuffs gaped at Ilvermorny's Thunderbird constructs sheltering beneath great tents. The heads of Uagadou and Castello Bruxo had also brought their students to the Great Hall to register. Harry, Ron, and Hermione used the free morning to stroll out toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Abraxan horses from Beauxbatons gleamed with a pearlescent sheen in the sunlight, and a vast rainbow-hued snake from Uagadou lay coiled on the grass, its scales shifting and throwing off a dreamlike glow. "It's beautiful," Hermione murmured, watching the snake's colors ripple. "I think it's a bit scary." Ron shivered. "It is a bit scary, but it's really beautiful too," Harry agreed. They circled the creature at a safe distance, pausing at its head where a crowd had already gathered. Goyle's broad shoulders loomed in the throng, and a glance beyond him confirmed Malfoy was there too, turned away from them. His pale hair flashed in the sunlight as he chatted cheerfully with several students from Uagadou. "So the change in its scales is not only for camouflage, but also an outward sign of its mood and magic, right?" A Uagadou student nodded in fluent English. "Exactly. When it's calm, the colors soften, like a rainbow after the rain. When it's excited or alarmed, its scales flash dangerous reds." Harry and his friends watched the easy conversation from a distance and decided not to interrupt. They drifted along the path toward Hagrid's hut. Today, Hagrid looked as though he'd come straight from a tailor. He wore a neat gray suit with a double-breasted waistcoat and a matching trench coat. His tangled hair and beard had been carefully combed, and a faint scent of cologne clung to him. "Hey!" "You're finally here," he rumbled, practically bursting with excitement. "I thought maybe you'd forgotten the way to my place." "Sorry, Hagrid," Hermione said. "This term's been so busy." It was true. Compared with the previous 2 years, they'd visited less. Hermione had been buried in studies. Harry and Ron had been trying, with varying success, to keep up with their reading between late-night wizard chess marathons. And on top of that, Hagrid's current charge, the blast-ended Scroots, had been especially unpleasant. The creatures were ugly, aggressive, and had left many students injured. Hagrid himself bore fresh wounds and had lost much of the skin on 8 of his 10 fingers to their bites. The hut remained unmistakably Hagrid's, a clutter of curious items, a patchwork quilt on a wooden bed, a huge copper kettle over the hearth, and strings of pickled meat and dried birds dangling from the rafters. Hermione eyed Hagrid's formal clothes as she sat down. "Hagrid, your outfit?" Hagrid reddened slightly and fussed at a waistcoat button. "Oh, that. I had Professor Nixia give me some advice for making this lot. 'Cept for the perfume, couldn't find any magic men's cologne worth a pinch." He looked at the three of them with rare vulnerability. "Do I look all right?" "Fantastic," Hermione said earnestly. Harry and Ron nodded in agreement. Hagrid filled 3 enormous mugs from the kettle, and the conversation quickly turned to the upcoming Triwizard Tournament. He was almost as enthusiastic about the tasks as the students themselves. "Just you wait," he said, grinning broadly. "It'll be a spectacle like nothing you've ever seen. The first task is—" He clapped a hand over his mouth, and his eyes went wide. "Oops, nearly let it slip. Tell us, Hagrid," the 3 urged, cradling their teacups. Hagrid shook his head, cheeks flushing. "Can't say. Dumbledore told me straight not to, but you'll see soon enough. It'll be wonderful." Suddenly he stood up and peered toward the door. "Oh dear, I nearly forgot. I've to fetch Madame Maxime. I promised to show her the greenhouses." He snatched a small bunch of flowers from the table and hurried out, leaving the trio exchanging amused looks. He was back almost as quickly, checking himself in a tiny broken mirror and smoothing his hair with obvious pride. "Do I look all right?" he asked again. "You look great," Harry said promptly. "Brilliant," Ron added. "Perfect." Hagrid glanced at the flowers again, then, as if remembering something, dashed back in, scooped them up, and tucked the mirror into his coat. "See you at the feast. Lock up for me when you go, will ye? The key's under the mat by the door." He bounded away once more. Hermione suddenly called after him, darting to the doorway. Under Hagrid's puzzled look, she tapped the bouquet lightly with her wand. The wilting flowers seemed to drink in the spell and burst back into vibrant bloom. "Oh, thank you, Hermione, you clever little witch," Hagrid exclaimed, surprised and delighted, then hurried off again. Harry and Ron watched Hagrid's retreating back, both looking perplexed. "What's wrong with him?" Ron asked. "Isn't it obvious?" Hermione rolled her eyes and went back to obvious, Ron pressed. Harry hesitated only a moment before a smile tugged at his mouth. "Hermione means he might be in love." "Who?" Ron asked blankly. "You know who," Harry said. "Oh, Madame Maxime." Ron finally understood and grinned. Back inside, Hermione used magic to straighten Hagrid's hut, while Harry washed and put away the teacups one by one. Seeing them, Ron produced his wand and made a show of waving it a few times, pretending to be busy. Time passed in laughter and easy conversation as the last light of the setting sun gilded Hogwarts and dusk settled over the castle. The enchanted torches in the corridors came alight one by one, bathing the stone in a warm glow. The great hall thrummed with expectation. Students from the 7 schools clustered at their long tables in a riot of uniforms, whispers ricocheting off the walls. Even the elegant Halloween delicacies on the golden platters suddenly seemed less important. Eyes kept flicking to the staff table, waiting for the moment everyone been anticipating. At the staff table sat Professor McGonagall, Snape, Sargeras, and other Hogwarts teachers, the principals of the visiting schools beside them. Ludo Bagman was whispering excitedly with Mr. Zhang from the Kunlun school. Barty Crouch sat near them, looking pale, irritated, and exhausted. When the last dessert had been cleared, Dumbledore rose slowly. He tapped his goblet gently, and the great hall fell silent. "The goblet of fire is about to make its choice." His voice, aged but clear, carried to every corner. Filch appeared with the tall goblet, its flames blue and white, and set it before the headmaster. Dumbledore inclined his head in thanks, then addressed the students. I will now read the names of the champions chosen by the Goblet of Fire. The champions will proceed to the adjacent room for a short rest and their initial instructions. Dumbledore glanced over the hall, then flicked his wand. Immediately, all the light sources dimmed, except for the flickering candlelight trapped in the pumpkin lanterns. The great hall was plunged into a smoky gloom, the goblet the only bright point. Its blue-white flames leapt and hissed, scattering sparks that traced glittering paths in the dark. Everyone held their breath, watching the dancing fire. Suddenly, the flames flared red, spitting sparks. A tongue of flame shot up and expelled a nearly singed scrap of parchment. Dumbledore reached out and caught it, holding it to the firelight to read the name. The Durmstrang champion, he announced, Victor Krum. A roar of applause rose from Durmstrang's table. Krum stood, expression unreadable, and walked to the side room. The goblet flared red again, and another scrap drifted up. Dumbledore caught it as before. The Beauxbatons champion, Fleur Delacour. Silver-haired Fleur rose with graceful poise and received her classmates' cheers. The goblet continued to spit out parchment after parchment. The Ilvermorny champion, Cuthbert Kowalski. A sunny, handsome boy jumped to his feet, high-fived his friends, and hurried away. The Wagadu champion, Viola Adesinji. A lithe girl rose serenely, her white teeth flashing in the firelight. The Castellabruxo champion, Diego Rodriguez. A bronze-skinned boy stood, adjusted his collar with confidence, and left to applause. The Wagadu champion, Kylie Taraway. A girl with long braids covered her mouth in surprise and walked toward the antechamber to the encouragement of her companions. Finally, the flames reddened again, and the whole Hogwarts table held its breath. The Hogwarts champion, Dumbledore paused, eyes sweeping across the tense faces in the hall. Cedric Diggory! Hufflepuff's table exploded in cheering, and the other houses clapped too. Cedric rose, smiling modestly, and went into the side room accompanied by his friends. Then, unexpectedly, the goblet flared red once more. A brilliant tongue of flame shot up and expelled another scrap of parchment that drifted slowly down. The hall froze. Everyone stared as Dumbledore reached out and caught it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Dumbledore cleared his throat and read the name aloud. Champion of the Kunlun School, Jingshui. A ripple of confused whispers spread through the hall. Mr. Pa Zhang at the staff table looked stunned for a heartbeat, then at the two Kunlun students who, sitting at the Gryffindor table, were exchanging delighted, conspiratorial smiles. The girl called Jingshui stood up quickly, offered Dumbledore an apologetic smile, and walked into the side room, leaving a bewildered crowd behind her. What exactly is going on? Moody demanded, one eye squinting while his magical eye rolled unblinkingly toward Mr. Zhang. Mr. Zhang sprang to his feet and began apologizing. My sincerest apologies, everyone. I failed to properly supervise my students. I will have her withdraw immediately. I'm afraid not, Mr. Zhang. Dumbledore's voice was calm, not unkind. Once the goblet has chosen, a magical contract has been forged. What are the consequences of breaking such a contract? Mr. Zhang asked, frowning. The dissipation of their magic, Dumbledore said gravely. At best, they would become a squib. Everyone in the hall felt a collective tightening of breath. Mr. Zhang's brows were drawn together as he turned to the other heads. I beg your pardon for my pupil's rashness, he said. I stake my own reputation that Jingshui will not win this competition and will not take the trophy or the prize money. His meaning was plain. The heads exchanged looks, considered for a moment, and then nodded. Even Karkaroff, who seldom held his tongue, made no objection and tacitly accepted the extra contestant. Very well, he said. Don't worry, Mr. Zhang. Ludo Bagman beamed. Barty and I both welcome Kunlun Magic School's participation. Don't we, Barty? He added. Barty Crouch's face flickered oddly. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then only gave a brief nod. Mr. Zhang exhaled in obvious relief. Dumbledore rose and, turning to the students below the high table, spoke in his gentle, measured voice. To encourage exchange among the magical schools, the judges and the organizing committee have agreed to add a temporary slot for Kunlun Magic School. I am sure their unique techniques will make a fine showing. No sooner had he finished than the blue flame in the goblet of fire flared crimson. Sparks spat, and a long tongue of flame licked the air, then propelled a slip of parchment out that drifted down. Sargeras frowned. Every face at the high table reflected the same sudden confusion. Even old Barty, who had been half asleep, sat up and squinted at the scrap in Dumbledore's hand. Moody's scarred features remained unreadable. He seemed unruffled by the dinner's continual surprises. Every eye turned back to Dumbledore. When Dumbledore read the name on the parchment, his face grew serious. A whisper ran along the benches. Ron nudged Harry. "Who is it this time? Is there a ninth school?" He whispered. Harry's own questions multiplied. He watched the headmaster, waiting as Dumbledore's gaze lingered oddly before the scrap. "Why is he looking at me?" The thought flickered through Harry's mind, and then the hall heard Dumbledore's voice call out. "Harry Potter!" The sound carried to even the far corners of the great hall. Harry stared, bewildered. He hadn't expected his name. The murmurs died away as everyone turned toward him. For a moment, he was the only person in the room. He realized then that his name had actually been written on the parchment. For a breathless second, he felt rooted in place, as if under the strongest Petrificus Totalis. Ron's eyes were wide, Hermione's face pinched with worry. "Harry, please go to the antechamber," Dumbledore said, calm, but with none of his usual twinkling amusement. Under 1,000 stares, astonishment, suspicion, scrutiny, Harry rose like someone in a trance and walked toward the side room. The moment he disappeared behind the door, the suppressed buzz in the hall rose into a roar. Professor McGonagall sprang from the high table, her face pale, and rushed to Dumbledore. She spoke to him in a low, urgent voice, her hands trembling. The uproar was cut briefly short when the blue flame in the goblet gasped and went out with a soft poof. That was all the provocation the heads needed. Karkaroff was first to strike. "This is preposterous," he snapped, his voice like a chill wind. "We agreed to add an extra contestant to promote exchange, but that does not mean Hogwarts may supply 2 champions. His usual oily smile had vanished, replaced by plain anger. "You must explain, Dumbledore. The Goblet of Fire does not make exceptions for Hogwarts, not even for the host school." Madame Maxime leaned forward, indignation clear in her tone. "Igor is not without reason," she said. "Each school sends 1 champion. That is fairness. Hogwarts taking 2 slots upends that balance. I must object. I cannot accept this result." "Didn't you set an age line excluding competitors under 17, Dumbledore?" the white-browed Thunderbird demanded. "That boy looks underage." Snape seized the moment to make sure his opinion was heard. "This is probably Potter's doing, principals," he said quietly. "Don't blame Dumbledore. Ever since he arrived, Potter has been breaking rules." "Thank you for your analysis, Severus," Dumbledore interrupted mildly. Snape shut his mouth, though his dark eyes glittered with satisfaction. Dumbledore's face turned grave. "I stake my honor," he said, looking slowly around the table until his gaze settled on Karkaroff and Maxime. "I had no knowledge of this and would never approve any student breaking the rules. We have a very difficult decision to make now. Either we forcibly strip the boy of his qualification and risk harm from any magical backlash, or we accept this extraordinary result and do our utmost to ensure absolute fairness in the challenges to come." Karkaroff scoffed. "Fairness," he demanded. "When the starting line is already tilted, where does fairness come into it?" Aram Kofiat, the head of Ouagadougou, shook his long braids slowly. "It might be a mistake of an old magical artifact," he said quietly, "but we must not compromise the competition's integrity." Ouagadou's black headmistress agreed curtly. 2 champions from 1 school makes no sense. Even the usually distant principal of Castello Bruso spoke against it. "Dumbledore, think how this will appear. People will suspect Hogwarts used its host status to gain advantage. To protect this tournament's reputation, I, too, favor disqualification of that boy." Mr. Zhang sat awkwardly at the side, unable to take either position. He kept his gaze down, fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table before him. Chapter 334. Each holds his own opinion. Facing the principal's united questioning, Dumbledore's expression grew grave. "Gentlemen, I understand your concern and your anger." His deep blue eyes swept over every displeased face. His voice stayed steady. "Please believe me, I am as shocked as you are, and just as eager to find answers. But the Goblet of Fire's choice is bound by a magical contract, as we all know. The fact that Harry Potter's name was spat out means that contract has been formed. None of us can break it. If we do, that child will suffer terrible consequences. His magic could be stripped away, or worse. He let the words "magic could be stripped away" hang in the air. The great hall fell silent. Students held their breath, professors looked grave, and the visiting heads exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Karkaroff broke the silence. Everyone must pay the price of their own choices. His tone was cold. He clearly did not accept Dumbledore's explanation. As for a loss of magic, he should have considered that before he tossed his name into the goblet. That suits you perfectly, doesn't it? Mad-Eye Moody suddenly roared, startling several younger students. Karkaroff didn't look at him, merely picked up the goblet in front of him, his voice icy. Moody's magical eye spun wildly in its socket, sweeping the room and pausing on each person at the high table. "It's obvious," Moody shouted, "that the boy can't have tricked the age line put in place by the goblet, and it's even less likely that he could have tripped the goblet's selection by accident." He fixed them all with his one good eye. To put it bluntly, someone deliberately entered his name into the goblet with the intention that he'd either die in the tournament or be disqualified right away, causing him to lose his magic because the contract would have been breached and turning him into a squib. "Oh, really?" Madame Maxime asked dryly, looking down at Moody. "And what evidence do you have?" "It's simple. Ask Potter himself." Moody took a step forward, his wooden leg thudding on the floor. "If necessary, we can use Veritaserum. I must say, of all of us, Potter has the most reason to feel wronged. Yet so far, other than waiting quietly in the side room, he hasn't complained." "Why should he complain?" A clear voice came from the doorway of the side room where the champions had waited. Fleur Delacour stepped forward, the other champions close behind her, and Harry walked among them. Fleur met Moody's grim face without flinching, her silvery hair shining in the candlelight. "He got to compete, didn't he?" Her voice was steady, every word precise. "We all wanted to be chosen. We all wanted the chance to bring glory to our schools. This is an opportunity we've all dreamed of." "But he might die because of it," Moody snapped. "We could all die in that competition. We understood that when we put our names in the goblet." Fleur shot back, unbowed. She looked at the twitching Moody and continued, "We put our lives on the line. If we can't even expect basic fairness, then what's the point?" "We only want fairness," Crumb said quietly, frowning. "We don't care about the politics, just that it's fair." Ilvermorny's champion, Spurt Kowalski, shook his head. "Let him withdraw. That's fair to everyone." "But that's not fair to me." Harry's expression had cleared. The days he had worn since the goblet had spat his name was gone. He was as puzzled by this undeserved calamity as everyone else, and he knew the punishment that might follow if he withdrew. He wouldn't accept doing nothing. He drew in a steady breath, straightened, and met the eyes in the hall. "If you insist I should withdraw, then you must sever the magical contract formed between me and the Goblet of Fire," he said evenly. "Otherwise, I will compete." Several heads and champions raised their eyebrows at his words. Diego Rodriguez, the Castellabruxo champion, sneered, "You've got some nerve. You'd do anything to show off." Harry appeared not to hear the taunt. His gaze moved deliberately across the room, first to Moody, who had spoken up for him, then to the silent figure of Sargeras, then to a frowning Professor McGonagall and the solemn Dumbledore, finally resting on Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table, their faces full of worry. "I never, in any way, put my name into the goblet," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the great hall. "For this, I'm willing to undergo Veritaserum, or even a memory examination." The hall fell quiet at that. Professor McGonagall was the first to speak. "I choose to believe you without Veritaserum, Potter," she said firmly. "No one has the right to subject my student to that." Harry looked gratefully at her, but then shook his head. "Professor, if anyone doubts me, I will submit to testing." Seeing McGonagall about to interrupt, he hurried on. "But if it is ultimately proven that I'm innocent, then whoever raised the question must face consequences." "What sort of consequences?" Jingshe from Kunlun Magic School asked curiously. "Whoever demands I prove it must withdraw from the competition," Harry said coldly. "Do I need to remind you?" Bayawala Adesinji, the Wagado champion, lifted his chin. "We are the legitimate champions. Questioning you is our right. Why should we take the risk?" Harry returned his stare without flinching. Then I remind you, I am a champion chosen by the Goblet of Fire as well. You are no nobler than I am." "Well said, lad," Moody whooped and slammed his staff down emphatically. "Potter must compete." "Thank you, Professor Moody," Harry said sincerely. 335. Chapter Chaos. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Give away free gifts. Dumbledore spoke at just the right moment. "I propose the judges hold an emergency meeting now, re-examine the rules, and put a strict oversight mechanism in place so Hogwarts gains no unfair advantage from this unusual situation. If any headmaster feels something is unjust, they may raise an objection, and the judges will decide together." Ludo Bagman, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension, hurried to smooth things over. Yes. What's done is done. We must resolve this. Albus is right. We can't break the contract, but we can make sure the competition is fair, can't we, Barty?" Barty Crouch Sr. pressed his lips together, his face paler and stiffer than usual. He looked around and said in an official tone, "Procedurally, since the Goblet of Fire has made its choice and is bound by contract, we have no authority to disqualify Mr. Potter." He cleared his throat. "The only feasible solution is to accept that there are 2 Hogwarts champions and strengthen supervision for the remaining tasks. I suggest we immediately revise the scoring rules." "I disagree," Karkaroff barked, his face contorted. "If Hogwarts gets 2, then I insist my other students be allowed to enter." "Principal Karkaroff, what do you mean?" Ludo wiped sweat from his brow and asked uneasily. "You want us to summon the goblet again and keep putting names in until every school has 2 champions? Only then will it be fair." "That won't work," Ludo said. "The goblet has gone out and will only reignite for the next tournament." "Did you hear that?" Karkaroff turned to the other heads with a mocking grin. "We prepared for months, held so many meetings, and then this blunder still happens. And now you talk about re-examining the rules and strengthening supervision? How is that any different from putting a fox in charge of the henhouse? Hogwarts is the host. How many of the judges are your people? What good is supervision?" "Igor, watch your language," Professor McGonagall snapped, her face flushed. "My students' right to a fair competition is being trampled, and you accuse me?" Madame Maxime rose as well, her enormous frame casting a shadow over half the head's table. "Albus, this is not something supervision can fix. This is a matter of principle. 2 names from Hogwarts is a desecration of fairness." "We must start over," the head of Ouagadougou demanded, his colorful braids swinging. "The goblet must be restarted and every school must select another champion. That's the only fair way." "I told you it can't be done," Ludo's voice wavered. He looked desperately at Crouch. "Barty, tell them the rules of the goblet." Crouch's lips moved as if to restore order, but his voice was drowned by the uproar. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Nearly every head rose, leaned forward, waved arms, and shouted. Accents from across the world mixed into a cacophony. Durmstrang students thumped the tables to back their headmaster. The Beauxbatons girls booed. Students from other schools yelled support for their own principals. The great hall became a boiling pot of fury. Harry stood amid the champions like a small boat in a storm, surrounded by a raging sea of anger. He saw Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table, mouths moving, trying to shout through the noise, but he heard nothing. Hogwarts' reputation in the international community could be ruined. "We Ouagadougou will never accept this. Castello Bruxo demands an immediate vote. Please be quiet. We will not take part in the next tournament. I want to leave right now." I said, "Quiet." An invisible surge of magic spread outward. Everyone chattering felt their throats tighten as if gripped by an unseen hand. In an instant, the great hall fell silent. Sargeras rose, his calm gaze sweeping over the flushed, excited faces. Then he spoke slowly. "Do I need to remind you who you are at this moment?" He pointed toward the long tables where students craned their necks. "Or have you so forgotten your image before your students that you're reduced to yelling at one another like fishwives? If that's what you want, perhaps a duel would be more honest than this." Snap! With a crisp snap of his fingers, the silencing charm lifted. The heads looked at one another, and the young wizards at the tables watched with shining eyes. "Dumbledore, what do you think?" someone asked. "It's not a matter of opinion," Sargeras replied coolly. "I agree that 2 champions from Hogwarts is unfair." Harry's stomach dropped. A cold chill ran through him. "Then what do you suggest?" McGonagall pressed. Fix the problem, Sargeras said succinctly. While ensuring Mr. Potter's safety, find a way for him to withdraw from the competition. Harry's tense shoulders loosened a little. He had feared they would demand his immediate withdrawal. I expected something clever, Karkaroff sneered at Sargeras. The head of Uagado shot back. If it were that simple, we wouldn't be shouting. Sargeras's expression was unreadable. Yet none of you are even willing to try with your wands. He shook his head. Frankly, I'm disappointed. As wizards, you resort only to emotional outbursts instead of solving the problem. Sargeras, are you confident you can break this magical contract? McGonagall asked tentatively. Not completely, he admitted, drawing his wand, but I can try. If there's any doubt, we should let Harry compete, Moody said in a deep voice. We cannot gamble with a student's safety. Dumbledore nodded. That would leave a second option. Sargeras did not argue. He spoke calmly. The second option is to relight the goblet. Ludicrous, Karkaroff sneered. The others frowned. Sargeras's eyes sharpened. Igor Karkaroff, that is the second time you've questioned me. A third, I'll make you experience how brilliant I am. His gaze swept the table. This goes for everyone. Before anyone could reply, his wand flashed. A streak of light shot toward the wooden cup before Dumbledore. Whoosh! Brilliant blue flames leapt up, their tongues of fire casting flickering light and shadow across every face. The great hall sank into an awed silence. Now, you may choose your school's second champion, Sargeras said, sheathing his wand. He turned his head toward Harry. Come with me, Mr. Potter. Sargeras tilted his head toward Harry. Come with me, Mr. Potter. He turned and strode for the great hall doors. Harry followed almost instinctively, leaving behind the sudden, heated arguments erupting in the hall. Ron and Hermione exchanged a glance, then without hesitation jumped down from the Gryffindor table and hurried after them, catching up under Professor McGonagall's slightly worried stare. They walked in silence through the castle corridors, the cool evening breeze brushing their faces. Sargeras led Harry to the shore of the Black Lake. A bright moon hung in the sky, silvering the water. The Forbidden Forest's silhouette loomed dark and distant. The two walked slowly along the shore, silence stretching between them. Harry felt uneasy, bracing for questioning. Sargeras finally spoke in a calm voice. I don't need to ask if you put your name in yourself. He didn't even look at Harry. In the Great Hall, I already got the answer by legilimency. You weren't lying. Harry exhaled, surprised he did not feel anger about the legilimency. Then do you have any idea why my name appeared in the Goblet of Fire? He asked. Sargeras stared at the lake's shimmering surface. I don't know, Professor, Harry said honestly, weary and confused. No idea at all. Sargeras pressed, his tone calm but insistent. Not even a wild guess? Harry fell quiet and stared into the dark depths of the Black Lake, as if he could feel the chill under the water. After a long moment, he clenched his fists and whispered, I think it might be Lord Voldemort, or his followers. He looked up, but I don't know how they did it. A very clever confundus, Sargeras said softly. To fool a magical item of the goblet's caliber, the caster would have to be no ordinary wizard. More importantly, whoever did it was able to come and go from Hogwarts freely enough to slip your name into the goblet. He turned to face Harry. So the question is, if a powerful wizard who can move through Hogwarts at will and bears you ill will wants to harm you, why would he go to such lengths to force you into a tournament instead of choosing a more direct method? Harry was silent. The question puzzled him too. I tried to get you to withdraw from the competition, Sargeras added quietly, because continuing is walking step by step into the other side's trap. There was a faint note of regret in his voice. But they refused to reach a consensus with me. For now, you must be doubly cautious during the tasks. I understand, Professor. I will be careful. Harry nodded solemnly. Sargeras nodded once, then changed the subject. There is one more thing, Potter. I want you to remember everything that happened tonight. The way you were questioned, the way you were used as a bargaining chip because you lacked the means to protect yourself. Harry opened his mouth to say something, but Sargeras raised a hand to stop him and continued. To change that reality, there are only two paths. Make yourself so powerful that no one dares to underestimate you, or create a world fair enough to protect the weak. Both paths are thorny, but if you accomplish either, You will never again be at the mercy of others as you were tonight." He raised his voice slightly and added without looking back, "Those words apply to both of you as well." A rustle from behind a large rock, and Ron and Hermione emerged with their heads bowed and faces flushed. "Never try to outsmart a powerful wizard," Sagres said flatly. The admonition tightened their shoulders. They dropped their eyes even lower. He scanned the three students and went on, sounding almost to himself as he organized his thoughts. "Since you're all here, let's consider this logically. Given the clues, who is most likely and most capable of doing this? First, motive. Who would most want Potter to be in danger, even wish him dead?" "You know who and his followers," Hermione and Ron said together. "Good. Next, who has the ability to move around Hogwarts freely or exploit a loophole without arousing suspicion?" "It could be people from other schools," Ron offered. "Or one of the heads of the other schools," Hermione added thoughtfully. "Students clearly don't have that access." "Mycroft Karkaroff. I've heard he was a Death Eater," Ron said, eyes brightening. He seemed unusually agitated at the feast. He opposed Harry's participation so strongly it looked like fairness. But could that intensity be a cover to clear himself? If it were him, would he behave so obviously? Sagres interjected. If he were the mastermind, would he put a sign on his own head saying, "I am the suspect"? "What do you mean?" Ron snapped, affronted. "My reasoning is perfectly sound. Precisely because it's so sound, it looks deliberate," Hermione replied, patient but firm. "If Karkaroff were truly behind this, acting so obviously suspicious is a poor disguise." "Maybe that's the point," Ron insisted. "Maybe he's acting suspicious on purpose so we'd rule him out, some double bluff." "Oh, Ron," Hermione said, rolling her eyes. "This isn't a game of wizard chess. People are talking about Harry's life." "I actually think Mr. Weasley's line of thought is not without merit," Sagres said suddenly, quiet enough to make the bickering pair freeze. Ron straightened and shot Hermione a triumphant look. "Until the truth comes out, every possibility is worth considering, no matter how obvious or how unlikely," Sagres continued. "This is only speculation. Be bolder in your thinking." Emboldened, Ron brightened again. "Then could it be Mr. Zhang? Maybe he's trying to muddy the waters so nobody cares that someone entered the tournament late." Hermione frowned, turning it over. "That's a possibility." She didn't sound convinced, but she didn't dismiss it either. "Or perhaps the problem lies within Hogwarts," Harry offered. "Ah, Snape," Ron blurted, then fell silent under Professor Greengrass's calm gaze. "Professor Snape certainly has a prejudice against Potter," Professor Greengrass said evenly, "but that doesn't make him the perpetrator. He's one of Dumbledore's most trusted men. He isn't our primary suspect right now." "Then Professor Moody should be cleared as well," Hermione said logically. "He and Dumbledore have been friends for years." "Moody's been on Harry's side from the start," Ron agreed. "I can't imagine him being in league with Voldemort." "Moody captured so many Death Eaters and Dark Wizards himself," Harry added. "There's no reason to suspect he's allied with them." There was a short pause. Hermione hesitated before speaking again. "There was one other person at the feast whose behavior I found odd." "Who?" Harry and Ron asked together. "Mr. Crouch," Hermione said firmly. "Did you notice how quiet he was compared to the decisive man we saw at the Quidditch World Cup? Tonight he barely spoke, and the few times he did." "He confirmed that Harry was eligible to compete," Ron finished, frowning and trying to match Hermione's thoughtful air. Hermione suddenly shook her head. "No, wait, that doesn't fit. Mr. Crouch hates the dark arts and Death Eaters, and he's always been ruthless in his methods. He even sent his own son to Azkaban. He wouldn't have reason to plot against Harry." She looked to Professor Greengrass for confirmation, but he was staring at the Black Lake, distant and thoughtful. "Professor?" Harry ventured. "Professor Greengrass?" Ron raised his voice as well. "Professor!" Hermione called more loudly. Professor Greengrass blinked, came back to them, and gave a small, apologetic smile. "Sorry, my mind wandered. What did you say? I didn't hear everything." They repeated their observations about Crouch's silence and Hermione's doubts. Greengrass's gaze darkened slightly as he listened. "In the magical world, many things cannot be judged by appearances or past impressions alone," he said slowly. "Miss Granger, you're right about his iron-handed past. But consider this. Someone with a firm will and a clear stance can become an ideal target for certain dark magics. You mean, Hermione began. Greengrass raised a hand to cut her off. Imperio can seize a person's mind and actions, making them an unwilling puppet. Polyjuice Potion can perfectly change someone's appearance, and some people can alter or steal memories. He let the words hang. So it's dangerous to assume someone is the same now as they were before. Often the surface hides a very different truth. That makes everything horribly complicated, Hermione said, frustrated. If we think like that, anyone could be under Imperio. We can't investigate unless we catch someone in the act. Indeed, Greengrass agreed. That is the terror of Imperius. In the depths of Voldemort's power, the damage Imperio did within the Ministry, corrupting trusts and making enemies indistinguishable from friends, was greater than that of the other unforgivable curses. He shook his head, steering them away from endless speculation. But that's all conjecture without direction. Baseless suspicion only leads deeper into fog. He turned to Harry. Potter, have you been using the Marauders map recently? No, Professor. We haven't been out at night much. Mostly we've been practicing spells. Hermione's nearly finished teaching us Standard Book of Spells, grade 6. You should take the map out again, Greengrass suggested. It concerns your safety. If you see anyone or anything suspicious on it, tell me. All right, he said, clapping his hands gently to draw them back to practical matters. For now, focus on the competition. The first task is coming soon, and whoever put your name into the Goblet of Fire could have set deadly traps within that task. What you must do is not only survive and complete the task, he continued, but also watch for anything out of the ordinary. A strange look, an odd word, a coincidence that doesn't add up. Those small things might lead you to the mastermind. As they were absorbing this, a tall figure approached from the direction of the castle. Moonlight caught his gray robes and dignified face. Barlickner Wolf, headmaster of Ilvermorny, a Thunderbird. Professor Greengrass, he said in a deep, penetrating voice. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Greengrass inclined his head and turned to the three students. That's all for tonight. Remember what I said. You should head back to the common room. Though curious, the three nodded and started back toward the castle along the path. Ron glanced back. Hermione tugged him along. Once they were swallowed by the night, Greengrass faced the Ilvermorny headmaster. Has the selection finished? He asked. Yes, Barlickner Wolf replied, looking toward the castle. The Goblet of Fire has made its choices. 8 schools, 16 champions. This Triwizard tournament is sure to go down in history. History isn't always kind, Greengrass said calmly. Change often casts a shadow. They exchanged guarded thoughts about the strange events at the feast. After a moment of shared concern, Wolf's tone grew unusually solemn. I have an impertinent request, he said. Regarding the elixir of life I received from the bronze feather, may I lend it to a friend to use? My own need can wait. Chapter 338. This is what we Gryffindors are like. A flicker of surprise passed through Sargeras's eyes. The elixir of life wasn't something to hand out lightly. Its importance was extraordinary. Who is it, he asked, curiosity in his voice, that makes you willing to part with something so precious? Thunderbird smiled as if it were nothing. Queenie Goldstein. She's the grandmother of Ilvermorny's champion, Cuthbert Kowalski. He didn't try to hide it. She's an old friend. Her husband is a muggle in his 90s, and his time is coming. She's doing everything she can to keep him alive. Queenie Goldstein, Sargeras mused, searching his memory. Thunderbird gave him the missing piece at the right moment. She's Newt Scamander's wife's sister. Sargeras's face cleared. Ah, so it's her. He remembered Thunderbird's friendship with the famous magizoologist and how Newt had even helped handle the dangerous Nangdu leopard that Bronze Feather had captured last time. This favor could not be ignored. I understand. Sargeras nodded. I'll tell Nightingale to increase your elixir of life allocation to 2 portions a month starting next month. However, his tone turned grave. You must ensure every dose you hand over is actually consumed by that muggle gentleman and only under your direct supervision. That is non-negotiable. Of course, Thunderbird promised solemnly. I won't let it cause us trouble, and Queenie thanks you. Sargeras waved a hand in parting, but his warning was sharp. Thunderbird, make sure you tell Madame Goldstein clearly, and remind yourself, While the potion may extend a muggle's life, living far beyond normal human limits will attract attention and danger. Immortality is not always a blessing for those who cannot hide in the magical world. It can invite disaster. Be extremely careful. Thunderbird nodded, the weight of the responsibility written on his face. I'll pass that on exactly. Meanwhile, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were dealing with a different kind of trouble on their way back to the castle. Their heads were down, and all three wanted was to cross the grounds quickly and get back to Gryffindor Tower to process everything that had happened that evening. As they reached the castle gates, a group of Beauxbaton students in shimmering silk robes came the other way. Several of the girls caught sight of Harry, exchanged sharp looks, clustered together, and began whispering while deliberately pointing at him. "Look, it's him, the little boy who was chosen," one murmured. "He's looking over," another cautioned. "What's there to be afraid of? He's a greenhorn. I don't see how the Goblet of Fire picked him. Maybe Hogwarts ran out of people?" They kept their voices low and spoke English with a French lilt, as if to ensure Harry wouldn't catch everything. The words greenhorn and little boy stung Harry. The doubts he'd endured that night, the danger looming ahead, and the anger he'd swallowed for hours all flared up. He stopped abruptly then, to Ron and Hermione's surprise, spun around and strode toward the girls. Ron and Hermione followed. "What were you just saying?" Harry asked, voice tight with suppressed fury. Fleur Delacour, leading the group, lifted her chin slightly. Her Vila charm usually left boys breathless, but it had no effect on the furious Harry. She spoke in a melodious, superior tone. "We were merely stating a fact, Mr. Potter. Entering has its risks. We were curious if you are truly prepared." Her condescension, as if addressing an ignorant child, made Hermione bristle. "What we're prepared for is none of your business." Ron's face flushed the color of his hair as he shot back. For once, Fleur's charm seemed useless against him. If all you can see is someone's age, you'd better watch yourself. Eventually, you'll pay for that kind of arrogance. Fleur arched an eyebrow. "Oh, really? I shall look forward to it." Hermione stepped in, eyes flashing. "Miss Delacour, age has never been the measure of a wizard's ability. Professor Greengrass was awarded the Order of Merlin at 15 for innovations in healing magic." She didn't add that she herself had faced dark wizards in the recent years and could claim to know the feel of a life-and-death fight. Age proves nothing. Experience does. Her sharp gaze swept the Beauxbatons girls. Without another word, she grabbed Harry by one sleeve and Ron by the other. "Let's go. Don't waste your breath on them." She pulled them down the dim castle corridor without looking back. Even after they were out of sight of the Beauxbaton students, Hermione's chest still rose and fell with indignation. She released their arms, turned, eyes alight with a rare fierceness. "Harry, did you hear that?" She spoke with resolve. "If you meet Fleur Delacour, or anyone else who underestimates you in the contest, you must do your best. Even if you can't win, make sure they don't forget you. Fight for your pride." Before Harry could answer, she switched to Ron, her voice absolute. "And you, from today on, your study time doubles. The next days are going to be hard, and I won't tolerate any slack." "Wait, Hermione," Ron protested, reluctant. "I don't have to be in that blasted competition. Why should I suffer for it?" Hermione planted her hands on her hips and fixed him with a stare. "Ronald Weasley, have you already forgotten how helpless you felt tonight? Or are you saying that the next time one of us is in danger, you'll just stand by and do nothing?" Her words landed like a hammer. Ron felt the memory of helplessness when Harry had been questioned by everyone and the possibility of future dangers. His reluctance melted. He slumped his shoulders and muttered, all right, you're right." "So what exactly are the tasks?" Harry asked, steering them back to the most urgent question. "We still don't know anything." Hermione drew a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. "We'll find out. When we get to the common room, we'll ask the older students first." They climbed to Gryffindor Tower, gave the password to the fat lady, and stepped into the common room, and the scene that met them was unexpected. "He's here! Our champion!" A roar of cheering and applause rose up the moment they entered. Students leapt from armchairs and sofas, faces bright with excitement. Harry was swamped by the crowd, hands clapping his back, pats on his shoulder, congratulations all around. Of course, not everyone was convinced of his innocence. Beneath the cheers, he could still hear doubt. "How did you do it, Harry? He must have used something we don't know about. Who cares? He's one of us. That's enough." Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas shoved through, curiosity written all over their faces. "The first task is next Tuesday, Harry. You nervous?" Seamus asked. "Seriously, how did you trick that age line?" Harry tried to explain. I don't know how my name got in." But his words were drowned by more cheers. Most people didn't care whether he'd been chosen by fair means. Harry Potter, being one of Gryffindor's champions, was cause enough for pride. Amid fatigue and unease, that almost blind support warmed him. This was what Gryffindor looked like. After a night of revelry, the fire in the common room had dwindled to glowing embers that crackled softly. The last students yawned and drifted off to their dormitories. "They're all gone," Hermione whispered, eyes sweeping the empty room. The three of them exchanged a look. In perfect silence, they drew their wands, pointed them at themselves, and murmured, "Wakeful reprieve." A cool, clear lift chased away the mental fog. Refocused, they flipped through their textbooks for a while, waiting until even mischief-prone twins like Fred and George would surely be asleep. Only then did Harry carefully take a folded scrap of parchment from his pocket. He unfolded it. Ink lines spread like vines across the surface, forming a detailed map of Hogwarts and its grounds. Tiny black dots peppered the parchment. Each bore a name and traced slow movements across the estate. "Our main job tonight is to watch the visitors from the other schools," Harry said softly. "See if anyone does anything unusual." Ron leaned in, lowering his voice as he pointed to the edge of the map. "This should be by the Forbidden Forest. Look at these names." They traced the cluster of dots where the visiting schools were gathered. Beside the Beauxbatons carriage, Madame Maxime's name stood out. Fleur Delacour and the other girls' names clustered on the upper level of the carriage. On the Durmstrang ship, Crumb's dot remained in a private cabin, while most of the others dotted the crew quarters. Hermione's fingertip moved across the parchment, seeking principals and champions from other schools, Ouagadougou, Ilvermorny, and so on, each name located in its temporary quarters, most settled for the night. "Wait," Harry's voice faltered. He fixed his gaze on a spot near the castle boundary, deep where the Forbidden Forest began. "Hagrid, where is he going so late?" Indeed, a small dot for Rubus Hagrid was edging toward the forest. Before they could worry further, Hermione interrupted. "Never mind that for the moment. Look at Karkaroff. He doesn't seem to be lit." Harry and Ron scanned the Durmstrang ship at once. Karkaroff's name was missing from the captain's cabin. They combed the map, picking through clustered dots until they found him. The little black dot labeled Igor Karkaroff was moving through a castle corridor toward the dungeons where Professor Snape's office was located. "He's looking for Snape?" Ron guessed, disgust tinting his voice. "I knew it. A secret midnight meeting, and probably for something dodgy." "Don't jump to conclusions," Hermione cautioned, brow drawn tight. Still, they kept searching, watching for anything else out of place. Harry's finger trembled when he found another dot. He squinted at a tiny name deeper in the forest. "Look here. Charlie Weasley?" Ron blinked. "Charlie? Isn't he in Romania studying dragons? How's he at Hogwarts all of a sudden?" They watched. The dots for Rubus Hagrid and Charlie Weasley met, then walked together into the Forbidden Forest until they slipped off the map's range. A chill ran down their spines. Hermione looked up, her face suddenly stunned with a dawning realization. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Harry, the first task. Could it be they intend to make you?" The three of them put the Marauder's map away with heavy thoughts. They resolved that after tomorrow's auditing class, they would tell Professor Sargeras about Karkaroff's late-night visit to the dungeons. But morning brought its own pressures. As a champion, Harry felt the weight of other people's expectations and suspicions. Inside Gryffindor, he was supported and cheered, but the rest of the castle felt different. In corridors, he felt avoided gazes and muffled whispers wrap around him like a web. No one openly accused him, but the looks from some students, Hufflepuffs who had high hopes for Cedric Diggory, some Ravenclaws who prized rules above all, were thinly veiled suspicion. In their eyes, the unspoken conclusion was the same. The underage boy must have cheated to put his name in the Goblet of Fire. "Don't mind them, Harry," Hermione said, reading his discomfort. They don't know anything. Ron nodded emphatically. Harry drew a steadying breath. He didn't care that much what strangers thought. What mattered was the unwavering trust of his closest friends. Divination that morning was the same as ever. Professor Trelawney singled him out and spoke again of an imminent violent death. He'd grown almost numb to such pronouncements. After class, they hurried toward Sargeras's classroom, and just outside the entrance hall, they bumped into Cedric Diggory. The Hufflepuff champion stood with friends, tall and pleasant, smiling with a confident, open expression. He paused when he saw Harry and nodded. The last class this morning, all the champions have to go to the staff room to have our wands checked, he said. Oh, right. Thanks, Cedric, Harry replied, briefly unsettled by the formality of it. Cedric gave a friendly smile and joined his classmates for advanced charms. To Harry, Cedric looked exactly the part of the model champion, composed and sure. A flush of inferiority pricked him for a moment, but he pushed it down. He had his own reasons to be here that had nothing to do with looks or popularity. When they reached Sargeras's classroom, it was more crowded than usual. Word of the professor's reputation had drawn many visitors from other schools to audit his lecture. The fixed seats were full. Students packed the back or leaned against the walls. Sargeras stood at the podium. He tapped the classroom wall with his wand. Space rippled, the wall retreated, and the ceiling lifted. The previously cramped room expanded in a sweep of charm, becoming large and bright enough for everyone. Robes of many colors swirled around them: Durmstrang crimson, Beauxbatons pale blue, Ilvermorny blue, and cranberry. Accents and whispers braided a strange international hush through the air. When the last student slipped in, Sargeras closed the door with a gentle wave and let his gray eyes travel slowly across the assembled faces. The murmurs died as if by command. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice calm but clear. "Whether you attend Hogwarts or have come from afar, you will surrender the next 2 hours to my discretion." He paused long enough to make them listen. "First, during my lecture, no one will ask questions." It was not barked as an order, yet there was no mistaking it. He continued, "Record your questions, inspirations, or arguments on parchment or in your mind. At the lesson's end, I will set aside time for them, and then you may speak freely." A few students frowned at the restriction, but no one challenged him. "To ensure you absorb what I teach, rather than be distracted by useless emotion or scattered thought." He traced an elegant pattern with his wand. "We will use an unconventional auxiliary charm." An invisible wave, centered on him, rolled through the room. A cool clarity poured in from the crown of every head, running through limbs like polished machinery. Ambient sounds dimmed, inner turmoil quieted. Everyone's thoughts smoothed and sharpened, memory and attention heightened. Hogwarts students were used to Sargeras's methods. For visiting pupils, surprise showed on many faces. "Don't worry," Sargeras added, serene. "It won't take your ability to think. It simply suppresses emotional interference so your mind can do its work." Now, today's main topic: disillusionment charm. He tapped his robe lightly with his wand. In the blink between breath and sound, his figure rippled like ink in water and dissolved into the wall behind him. The class let out a small, restrained gasp. Immediately after, his voice echoed again, as if coming from every direction. "It's not merely for clumsy disguises or pranks. Its essence is deception, deceiving human perception." His figure was where he'd always been, as if he had never moved. The core of the standard disillusionment charm and its many variations is not disappearance, but blending and refraction. He paced through his explanation, extending it to the key points for using the disillusionment charm in different scenarios. Most wizards stopped at the basic use, hiding themselves, and never developed the spell to its fullest. Under the influence of the mechanical mind, the students' brains worked efficiently, greedily absorbing every word. Sargeras's explanations were deep but clear. He described the flow of magic in the charm, how to fine-tune output to achieve perfect optical camouflage, and how to temporarily attach the charm's effect to small objects. He even demonstrated using the same principles to create a temporary mirage to deflect non-corporeal attack spells. "Remember," he said, "a clever disillusionment isn't about making yourself completely invisible, but about making your presence seem natural." This requires attention to every sound and disturbance in the air you make while disillusioned. It places extremely high demands on the caster's control. He added, to counter purely magical detection, you must combine it with other anti-detection spells. Understanding the spell's limitations is as important as mastering its use. He demonstrated several complex gestures and manipulations, advanced applications of the charm. Finally, a commonly overlooked point. He waved his wand. The disillusionment charm has a significant drawback. It cannot fool the eyes of certain creatures, such as Neasels or Billywigs, nor can it completely block heat or scent. He flicked his wand again, and more than 10 students in the first 2 rows blinked out of sight, leaving only faint depressions in their seats and an almost imperceptible ripple in the air. From now on, you have 1 minute to change positions. Then he turned to the students who were still visible. And you, take out your wands and try to find your disappeared classmates using the color-changing charm. He paused, emphasizing a crucial restriction. Each of you gets only 2 attempts. The classroom tensed instantly. A soft rustle came from where the hidden students sat, followed by a suspenseful silence. The students in the back, wands already in their hands, looked like hunters ready to strike. After a few more seconds, once the hiders were in position, Sagres smiled and announced, "Begin." At his command, the seekers sprang into action, wands up, eyes scanning the empty air for the slightest discrepancy. For a moment, there were only cautious footsteps and nervous breaths. Then a Ravenclaw girl snapped her head to the left and pointed her wand. A brilliant streak of color flew through the air and struck a slowly moving patch of nothing. In the next instant, an Ilvermorny boy stumbled into view, annoyance written on his face. That success encouraged others. Over a dozen bursts of colored light raced across the room, slamming into places the seekers judged suspicious. Several unlucky hiders were revealed. Others had used up both of their chances and could only retreat helplessly when hit. Then, without warning, a vase at the back toppled and smashed on the floor. Almost every gaze and wand turned to the sound. Colored lights hissed toward the wreckage. None found their mark. Chaos continued. Textbooks on desks fell one after another, creating a chorus of thumps. The seekers quickly understood the tactic. Those hidden were deliberately making false noises to draw fire and burn through the seekers' limited attempts. Other hiders used different tactics. One curled up completely under a long table, avoiding open spaces. Another quietly climbed onto the podium and lay motionless atop the lecturer's desk. Most shamelessly, one student slipped behind Sagres himself, using the professor's figure as cover, knowing his classmates would never fire a color-changing charm at him. The boldest approach was a dynamic strategy. A Castello Bruxo girl shadowed a slow-moving seeker, mirroring every step and pause so closely her breathing and the airflow she caused were indistinguishable from the person in front of her. She occasionally and silently extended her wand to manipulate objects, making a quill float here, a stack of parchments drift there, drawing attacks and creating opportunities to change position. She played the cat-and-mouse game to perfection. Time's up. Sagres flicked his wand, and all the hidden students reappeared at once. A collective gasp swept the room. A wonderful practical session. He surveyed the classroom, pausing on a few notable students. Let's analyze the problems. He looked first at the Durmstrang boy exposed by sound. Keeping moving is the right idea, but rhythm is everything. Hasty steps become a drumbeat that reveals you. He glanced toward the student on the lecturer's desk. A high vantage point is clever, but the more unexpected the position, the harder it is to escape once discovered. When his gaze settled on the student who had hidden behind him, light laughter rippled through the room. Using every resource, including the professor, is clever, Sagres said with a small smile, but in real combat, you may not always find such safe zones. Finally, he looked at the Castello Bruxo girl. The cleverest hiding is not staying still, but becoming part of the environment. Your dynamic camouflage and diversion tactics were exemplary. For that, I believe you deserve everyone's applause. The room burst into enthusiastic clapping. The Castello Bruxo girl seemed a little overwhelmed, her cheeks flushing. But you must understand, Sagres' tone turned serious. Today's exercise is meant to broaden your thinking. Real combat is full of variables. When facing multiple hidden enemies, you must change strategy. Rather than searching meticulously for each one, alter the environment so no one has a place to hide. He gave a few examples. A sweeping fire that engulfs the area, a revealing mist that conceals you while exposing enemy movement. And of course, hominum revelio is always the most direct solution. As the students returned to their seats, Sagres waved his wand and cleared the color from all who had been hit by the color-changing charm. I will emphasize one last time, the disillusionment charm is never mere concealment. It is a delicate dialogue with the environment and a silent game of wits with the observer. To truly master it requires far more than the spell itself. It demands absolute control over your magic and the surrounding environment. He looked out at faces, enlightened, excited, thoughtful, and asked quietly, "Any questions?" Practice the spell. Prepare for dismissal.